Hello everyone. This story takes place on the same piece of land referenced in my prior Let's Not Meet story, Horrifying Storage Unit Auction Experience, although this one took place almost 20 years prior. Back then, this parcel of land was owned by my dad and a business partner. It was essentially vacant, although we had taken on a few tenants who needed space to restore old sailboats or store industrial machinery. Being in a somewhat remote area, we were not immune to trespassers, and tenants would tell us about stolen tools or machinery parts often. This is where we met Dan. Dan came to my father much in the same way many others did. He had a boat restoration business and needed a place to work. He also asked if it would be okay if he slept on the property a few nights a week, under the guise of it saving him time commuting if he worked late on a project. This was mutually beneficial as Dan seemed like a decent guy and it would be nice to have a presence there overnight. We let him have a reduced rent rate as compensation for him generally keeping an eye on the place. A few months later, Dan had built himself a little compound, a series of 3 sea containers in a horseshoe configuration with a little trailer in the middle. Over the same period of time, we noticed that Dan didn't seem to work. There were never boats there, and Dan's a few nights a week became every night. Soon after, the excuses for why he didn't have rent started coming in. Effectively, we had invited a squatter into our property. Dan became the same kind of people we wanted him to keep out. Trying to look at the bright side, my dad and his partner were still okay with this as it was beneficial to have somebody there at all hours. The theft had gone down substantially and Dan's rent, even when paid in full, was not tipping any financial needles for us, so we let it be for the time. About a year later, Dan's mental health was starting to show its cracks. He went from polite to aggressive and bitter. He wasn't violent and was always very courteous to me personally. I was 23 at the time, but when he was asked about money and about rent, he would get defensive and start blaming my dad and his partner for why he couldn't pay. My dad wasn't afraid of anybody, but Dan made him nervous. My dad's partner had a friend who had recently dealt with a similar renter-turned-squatter situation, and when he called the police for assistance, he was thanked by the squatter with a bullet in his stomach. A few $1,000s back rent, or an eviction was not worth a gunshot to my dad, and we all felt that Dan was capable of snapping that way, so we just kept Dan busy doing cleanup and random tasks, which he always did, and remarkably well. One day my dad asked me to run to the site for him, as he was out of town. A tenant had called because it looked like somebody had tried to cut through a piece of our fence and wanted to get eyes on it. I pulled onto the property, where I was greeted by Dan. "Hey buddy," he yelled and waved. Dan was always very respectful to me, a courtesy that he had stopped showing my dad and his partner some time ago. "Hey Dan," I yelled back as I parked and got out of my car. "Come check this out," Dan replied and waited for me to step inside his little compound area. I was dying to see what was going on in there, honestly. I knew Dan was off, but I never felt intimidated or in danger. Just another weird guy. I walked over, and Dan brought me over to the next one of the sea containers. Look at this. This sea container had a roll-up door on the side instead of the typical latch and swing doors on the end. He rolls up the door to a wall. I look closer, and he has welded a metal wall 2 feet into the sea container. "What am I looking at, Dan?" "Skirt down the pathway to the left," he says and points. I look down the narrow pathway and see a small opening at the end, maybe 4 feet high and 3 feet wide. "Check it out." I should really not have gone in, but again, curiosity and that feeling of invincibility you have as a 23-year-old overshadowed my better judgment. I squeezed down the hall and through the door into the main hold of the sea container. The interior was painted deep red. Shag carpet had been poorly glued to the ground. On every wall and surface, broken pieces of mirror had been glued, and in the back, an old-style prison door had been welded in place, and behind it, a small round bed with shiny satin sheets. There are times when you can't really believe what you're seeing is real. The sensory overload of this enclosed place was too much. I don't know how long I stood there, but was snapped back to reality when Dan, standing right behind me, said, "I love to party in here." I hadn't even realized he followed me in. One good piece of advice my dad gave me when dealing with tricky situations was always, play along as long as you're safe until a moment comes that you can't get away fast and safely. I ran through the scenarios. I had done MMA and kickboxing in college. I'm not a small guy, but neither was Dan. Do I punch him and run and risk who knows what? Are there weapons hidden in here? I decided on the path of least resistance. Wow, Dan, this place is sick. I'll bet with some weed and some music, you could just spend hours back here. Yeah, man, you should come back and we can hang in here together. It'd be wild. His face softened like he had just found the friend who got it. Look, Dan, I want to hang out, but I came here to meet my dad and he should be pulling up right now, so I have to go. Dan shrugged and I walked past him, squeezing through pathways until I was back outside. I calmly walked to my car, got in and left. I relayed the whole story to my dad and his partner, who thought it was weird, but due to the fear of potential violence from Dan, both my dad and his partner weren't certain that Dan didn't know our home addresses. We didn't call the authorities. We did, however, keep a very close eye on Dan and actually brought in another tenant to stay the night and keep an eye on both Dan and the property. Eventually, Dan decided to move on. One day we showed up and his containers were being loaded out into a shipper, but he was nowhere to be found. He had moved on, leaving behind only sea container footprints and 3 dumpsters worth of garbage. I told the police this story after, along with his name, and they said they would keep their ears out, but not knowing where he went or if Dan was even his real name, there wasn't much they could do. In the time since, we have never had a visit from or heard from Dan. The only people I told this story to were my paintball friends at work, who would practice with me on this property and knew Dan since he was always there and coined the nickname Sex Dungeon Dan. This happened on the west coast of the United States back sometime between 2004 and 2005, and was by far the scariest thing that has ever happened to me. And looking back on it now, the dumbest thing I've ever done because of all the reckless mistakes that were made back then, and it still creeps me out every time I think about it. So, my roommate at the time had been chatting with a guy she met off at a party line. He invited her to his house to hang out, and since she didn't have a car, he offered to pick her up. She agreed, but didn't want to go to a man she never met's house alone. She asked if I could come along also, and I stupidly agreed to tag along because 1, I didn't want her to be by herself in case something bad happened, and 2, I didn't have anything else better to do, so why not? He said, yes, I can come too, and came to pick us up an hour and a half later around 8 p.m. at night. We met him outside in the parking lot. He was an older man in his 40s to 50s. We were in our early 20s. Fairly normal looking and seemed nice, so we chatted for a few minutes, then got in his car and drove off. He stopped to get gas, buy my roommate cigarettes, and buy our favorite liquor. He lived in an area that was almost 1 hour and 15 minutes away from where we lived. We call this area the Boondocks since it's mainly nothing but mountains, desert, wild animals, and poor cell reception. This should have set some alarm bells off, but no. We finally made it to his house and he gave us a tour throughout his very nice 5-bedroom house. He decided to have some steaks and get in the jacuzzi. So far everything is going fine and we're all just talking, joking, drinking, laughing. He took us into the kitchen to make sides for the steaks. While on the way to the kitchen, we noticed pictures on the wall of kids and a wedding photo of him and his wife. He nonchalantly admitted he was married and his family was out of town, like it was not a big deal. Wow, okay, and this is when things start going downhill. He then proceeded to ask if we partied. We said, nah, we don't do other drugs other than weed. He then brought out a huge bag of white powder and what I immediately assumed to be cocaine. He made a couple of lines on the kitchen counter and snorted them right in front of us. By this time, my roommates and my alarm bells started to go off loudly. Finally, right? And I started thinking of ways how we were going to get out of here. We had no cell phone reception, no car, and had no idea what his address was or exactly where we were at. It's about 1 or 2 a.m. now and he starts acting weird, talking loudly, cursing, and accusing us of stealing DVDs, specifically the Incredibles DVD, which he checked and was actually inside his DVD player. He kept saying he didn't remember my roommate wearing glasses earlier and accused her of stealing his wife's pair of eyeglasses. My roommate is basically blind without her glasses and wears them all the time, so I don't see how he didn't remember her wearing them when he picked us up. He then turned around and accused me of stealing the earrings I had in my ears. Of course, we are beyond ready to go. We told him to take us home. He yelled no, and he'll take us home when he gets ready to and asks if we want some pickles. Oh no, we just want to go home. After about 30 minutes of him ranting on about security cameras, how he has guns stashed everywhere in his house, pickles, and calling us bitches, he snorted another line and said he was going to take us home now. Normally, we wouldn't have gotten in a car with a cokehead driving, but we definitely didn't want to stay there a second longer. My roommate and I got in the back seat and he yelled, I'm not a frickin' chauffeur, so one of you needs to get in the front seat now, or we are not going anywhere. So of course, since it was my roommate's chat buddy, she got in the front seat. He then started speeding down the highway, still yelling and ranting. I was hoping he would get pulled over by the highway patrol, but unfortunately that didn't happen. About 10 minutes away from our place, he suddenly started acting nice again, saying how much fun he had and we should all hang out again. Right, dude. Yeah. Never again. He basically jumped out of his car without saying anything, and about an hour later, he called my roommate and asked her if we wanted to go to the movies and out to eat later that day. She told him to F off and lose her number. We never called the police because we basically didn't know anything about this dude. Just that he snorted coke, was married, and lived somewhere in the middle of nowhere, but my roommate did tell me she called this house a month later, hoping his wife would answer so she could tell her everything that happened. But he answered, hung up, and ended up changing his number a few days later. Thankfully, we never saw or heard from him again. I was a cashier at a busy grocery store only a 5-minute walk from where my family lived. I knew several customers very well since I worked regular weekend shifts, and lots of people came in at the same time each week. I always worked Sundays from 3 p.m. to 11 p.m. One Sunday afternoon was when I met this weird, creepy middle-aged man. He was with a woman and a young toddler the first time, so naturally, I thought they were a family. Nonetheless, I was my super friendly self. A lot of customers told me over the years that I made them smile or laugh. Maybe this was confused as flirting. I don't know. So anyhow, this man, despite his wife or girlfriend being there, was overly friendly with me right away. I noticed pretty quickly that he wouldn't take his eyes off me and held eye contact for way too long. He left and I brushed it off. Then at night around 9 p.m., when there was barely anyone in the store, he came alone when I was on break. I had another employee actually come upstairs to the break room telling me that a customer was asking for me by name. I didn't think anything of it because sometimes my friends came by or a customer came back because there was a mistake on their receipt. Cashier names were always listed on there. So of course it's this guy, but nothing is wrong. He came down to the grocery store not to complain or buy anything else, but to tell me he had a great interaction with me and that he sees great potential in my customer service skills and would like to go for coffee with him so that he can get to know me better. Professionally, of course. I politely declined and let him know I was in high school and had other professional plans for university. He becomes really pushy, saying it's never a bad thing to get your foot in the door. Can he at least get my number for when I'm finished university and looking for work? Keep in mind I'm 16 at this point. Who the heck asks that? I kept declining and then he offered to drive me home. It was late. I said no. I live close by, so I walked, and he started asking, "Oh, so what street do you live on?" "I live close by too." At this point, I can see another employee from a distance starting to wonder what's going on, and I'm getting creeped out and annoyed. My break was interrupted because of this guy after all, so I just say, "No thank you," over and over. Finally, he left, saying he'll be back next Sunday to see me because he sees great potential and won't let me go just like that. Red flags go off all over my head. Call my dad, tell him everything, and ask him to pick me up, even though we live super close, like not even a 2-minute drive. Obviously, he says yes, worried about me. When my dad picks me up, I noticed this guy in his car in the parking lot, waiting. More than an hour since we spoke. I, stupid me, didn't mention it to my dad because I'm 16 and still in denial that this could be a serious situation. When we start driving, I noticed that he is behind us, so finally I tell my dad. My dad drives straight and then circles around 2 different streets to see if he's following us, and yes, he is. My dad, being the European man that he is, gets out of the car to wreck this man, but the car speeds off. We wait a bit in my car as my dad debates calling the police, but decides not to. When we get home, he parks the car in the garage. The story doesn't end here, though. No. My parents try to force me to quit my job or just stop working Sundays, but I'm like, no, it's fine because who the heck knows? I was a stupid teenager. So nothing happens during my weekday shifts, and I basically forget about it. But the next Sunday night rolls around, and so does this weirdo. This time taking a photo of me with his phone. Kid you not, he took a photo of me as he approached my till. Laughed it all, saying, "I can't forget what you look like, right?" I was seriously shook but too nice to tell him off like I would have if it happened now. I don't remember the whole encounter, but he kept pushing for me to sit down with him privately because he owns a business and needs people like me. I was so uncomfortable and scared but tried to play it cool. My dad picked me up again that night. He wasn't in the parking lot this time. I stopped working Sundays and I gave my boss a description of the man. He came by one Sunday asking for me and was straight up told off by a supervisor, an older coworker and friend, telling him to never come back to the store or they would pursue legal action. I didn't see him again and I went off to university. Follow-up. One weekend in my second year of university, I went shopping with my mom, and when we were sitting in the food court eating, I felt somebody staring at me, and I saw him. Sitting at a table maybe 8 or so tables away, with that same woman and child and more people glaring at me, his eyes, his face. He looked like he wanted to eat my soul. I told my mom, and we got up and left the mall right away. I didn't look back, but I haven't seen him since, and I hope I never do again. I know some people will say maybe he meant well and really was just an eager businessman or something, but there's nothing like the vibe of knowing somebody just isn't right in the head. Just a little bit of info about me. I'm 26, female, and kind of a tomboy. I grew up climbing trees and playing in the dirt. I've never touched a Barbie in my life. Back in the summer of 2002, I was 16. My then boyfriend asked me on a camping trip with him and his parents. I, being the tomboy that I was, graciously accepted. His parents planned out a weekend of us going, and we were planning on rafting, boating, swimming, the works. Paradise for me. They had an RV and it was furnished with everything. I slept in the living or kitchen area on a makeshift bed, even though my boyfriend's parents didn't give a heck where I slept. I did it out of courtesy. Side note, we were out in the middle of the woods, a designated camping area. It was so quiet and peaceful. You could hear the river in the stillness of the night. It was soothing. I remember thinking to myself, I could live here forever. The next day was probably the most fun day of my life. We all went kayaking, which I have to say was awesome. And we swam, and then my boyfriend's dad cooked out. I can't remember the last time I had laughed so much and genuinely enjoyed myself. It seemed like the day flew by. Before I knew it, it was time for us to go to bed. We had a big day planned for the next day, and I was eager to get sleep just so I could wake up and do it all over. I remember laying awake though, and just staring at the ceiling. My boyfriend was snoring, and I laughed as quietly as I could. He snored very loudly. I got one last laugh before literally my life was changed forever. There was a tap on the side of the RV. It caught me off guard, and I wasn't even alarmed. I just thought it was a random noise. You know the ones, like a creak here and there, a sound of something settling. Whatever. The bottom line is that I wasn't scared or freaked out. I tried to sleep, but I heard another tap, and then I heard an unmistakable giggle. I thought maybe my boyfriend's parents were awake and getting some adult time, if you will, and I was thinking to myself, please let me fall asleep soon. Silence washed over the place. I hear the river, the ringing in my ears you get when it's dead silent. I had this sinking feeling in my stomach. I hear people say they get when something bad's about to happen. Well, I felt that at that moment. In the dead silence, I hear the giggle again, followed by a scraping sound coming from outside the RV. My heart jumped into my throat and I felt tears in my eyes. When I get nervous and scared, I cry. Somebody was outside the RV, but I was literally scared stiff. I couldn't move a muscle, and the scraping sound continued. I whispered for my boyfriend, but he just kept on snoring. I was lying about 5 feet away from the main door, although there are about 2 doors at the front of the RV and one emergency one at the back. I kept watching the little square hole in the door, hoping nobody would come through. More silence. My heart is beating so fast. I'm afraid I'm going to have a heart attack. I tap my chest to try and calm myself. As I'm watching the square hole in the door, I see a small, delicate-looking hand almost appear from the darkness. I almost shriek out loud. The hand was of a girl, no doubt. I could see those fake press-ons and know them from any Walmart store. But that still didn't stop me from almost shitting myself. I sit up and I start screaming, and I mean wailing. My boyfriend's parents stagger into the room and all I can do is point to the door. Boyfriend's dad goes to the open door, but there's a sudden crash, then he falls back inside, falling onto the couch. Out cold. A rock falls onto the floor, and that's when the boyfriend wakes up and starts shouting. The mom is going insane, tending to her husband. I am screaming, still in shock. Boyfriend is flipping his shit, and I eventually stop screaming. When I finally stop screaming, I hear the hysterical laughter from outside, followed by heavy footsteps on top of the RV. We're on the roof, on the roof. I hear a high-pitched, nasally voice tease from outside the RV. None of us had cell phones. It was 2002, and we were just now starting to get into the cell phone craze, but we had all magically managed to abstain somehow. The RV is rocking with somebody jumping up and down, and then there's a crash as somebody rams against the doorframe. The girl outside is laughing and screaming. She's mocking me. The dad manages to sober up, grab a gun from one of the cupboards, open the door, and fire out into the darkness. The prancing on the roof stops immediately. The girl shrieking outside stops suddenly, and everything goes silent. I turn to look at my boyfriend. There's a window behind him, and I see the face, a hood drawn over his face. I know it was a man because I could make out the outline of a beard on his face, but that was it. The man raised a gloved hand and waved at me. I pulled my boyfriend away from the window and started screaming. The dad runs inside, asking what's wrong. I look back at the window and the man is gone. We drove out of the campsite that night with a broken window. My boyfriend's dad went to the hospital with a minor concussion where the rock had hit him. Don't worry, my boyfriend's mom drove. The parents called the police the next morning and officers went out and searched the area. They didn't find anything. No other reports were ever filed after us. I had to go through counseling and therapy because I had trouble sleeping for about 2 years after it. My boyfriend and I broke up due to the stress I was going through from it actually. Eventually I started getting better. Then while I was in university, some girlfriend and I decided to go to the movies. There was a new one out called The Strangers. I decided to go because I had no homework. Turns out it was scary like the experience I went through, and I ended up having a panic attack in the middle of the theater and had to go to the hospital. A few months after that, I read a newspaper article where a woman was arrested at a campsite not too far away from where my boyfriend and his parents were that summer for vandalizing some tents and RVs. I don't know if it was the same girl. It didn't show her picture, but it made me wonder. As of 2012, I no longer go to therapy or have nightmares, but I do own several different types of guns, and if you knock on my door in the middle of the night, you better have a damn good explanation as to why you're there. Also, stay the heck off my roof. Thanks for being here, Reddit. My old house was a small house in a cul-de-sac in a small rural Australian town. The area wasn't bad, pretty quiet. Everybody kept to themselves. Due to the blistering heat, I liked to do a lot of gardening to make sure my lawn didn't die. I was out on the front lawn one day when I saw my neighbors were moving out. Their driveway ran up to the side of my house. It had a covered carport joined to my wall. The couple who rented the house were very nice. We said our goodbyes and I wished them well. Their old house lay empty for weeks. People came and people went, but nobody wanted to move in. Then one day I was fixing the sprinkler when a car drove into the neighboring driveway. 2 women in their late 50s got out of the front seats and helped a frail-looking woman of the same age from the back seat. The frail-looking woman was ushered into the house. One of the women got a cat from the back seat and put it in the house. One of them called to the lady inside. "The keys are on the side here, Rose." They closed the door and got back in the car. They saw me but ignored me as I made the attempt to say hello. They backed out of the driveway and drove off as fast as they could. A little while later, they returned in 2 separate cars. One was driving a small blue European car and the other was in the same car as earlier. The blue car drove up the driveway and stopped under the carport. The lady driving it got out, left the keys on the doormat and left, making sure to padlock the waist-height metal gates on her way out. She got in the car and they left again. I looked at the car and saw it was full of clothes and a couple of cardboard boxes marked personal. A couple of weeks went by and everything was going as normal. I didn't see much of the lady next door. Her cat was wandering around the street. It was healthy and friendly. One day I heard the gates opening and saw the blue car reversing out of the driveway. A few hours later, she returned with groceries. Well, at least she is a functioning person. I was worried when I hadn't seen her since she moved in. I said to my wife. Life carried on as normal. Nothing unremarkable happened. We were all keeping to ourselves as normal, except for a wave and a hello every time we saw a neighbor in the street. One Tuesday evening, I was taking the rubbish out. I noticed every house had put their bins out for collection, but those of the new neighbor was still next to her house. I wandered over to let her know so she wouldn't have to wait another week. All of the lights in the house were off, but her car was inside the carport. The gate was locked, so I couldn't get to the front door to knock without hopping over, and I wasn't desperate enough to tell her that I would trespass. If she had chain locked the gate, she obviously didn't want to be disturbed. Besides this, she was probably asleep if the lights were off. I didn't want to look in the windows. I walked back down the driveway when I had an eerie feeling like somebody with ill intent was standing directly behind me. I quickly turned to see the old lady staring at me from the darkness of her living room window. "Hi, bin day tomorrow. Just came over to let you know. Every Wednesday morning." She continued to stare at me unflinching. I shrugged to myself and walked back to my home. Later that night, I was waiting for my wife to return from work. She is a tiny bundle of beauty who was born and raised in Hong Kong but has lived in Australia for the past 10 years. Suddenly, I heard panicked banging on the door. I got up to open the door. My wife pushed her way in as soon as the door was open. There's someone out there. A voice. I think it is a drunk person. It sounds like an indigenous man's voice. He was screaming at me. She was shaking as she told me. Being small, she was afraid of the voice, as she was worried she could not defend herself if she were attacked. What was he saying? I don't know. He was screaming something about being Asian, but I didn't understand the rest. I went out to check where the voice was coming from, and I couldn't hear anything, so I walked up and down the street to see if I could see anyone. Nobody was there. Over the next few nights, the same thing happened. Whenever my wife was on her own, she would hear a voice screaming obscenities at her. Each night got worse. The insults got more extreme, and the voice became louder. One night, I waited for her to return from work under my carport. When she reached the front of the house, I heard the voice for the first time. It was exactly as she had described to me. A loud voice in the night. It seemed as though if it was coming from the front lawn of our house. The voice echoed around us. It was almost impossible to discern the location. My wife ran to me and held me, searching for shelter in my arms. I told her to go inside and lock the door. She reluctantly did so while watching my every move from between two slats in the blind of our front room window. I walked around slowly, trying to look confident to my wife, but really I was praying I wasn't about to be ambushed by a foul-mouthed attacker. I heard the screaming again, but I still couldn't place where it came from. This person was attacking me and my family, calling us all kind of slurs. I'm not Asian, but my wife is, so you better cut your shit, I shouted back. The voice went silent. I stayed still, waiting for another outburst, but nothing came. I made my way back into the house and consoled my shaken wife. The next day we heard the voice screaming outside. It was late afternoon. This was the first time we heard the voice during the day. I was tidying a back room that looked over the back garden. I had the window open because it was winter. Winter in the Australian outback means normal summer temperatures in any normal part of the world. Suddenly, I saw the trellis that was on top of the fence dividing the garden being torn away. The lady from next door was pulling the sun-worn timber away and throwing it to the back of her garden, all the while screaming in the creepy voice we had been hearing for the past couple of weeks. It was definitely an indigenous accent, but it wasn't a man's. It was the voice of a woman that had chain smoked for 40 years. I went into the garden, but she had already gone back inside. Knowing the fence belonged to the property she was in, I knew that I couldn't report her to the police for destruction of property. It was her fence, at least the property owners. I went back inside the house and heard the screaming start again. After half an hour of non-stop screaming, some neighbors from the opposite side of the street approached her house. Suddenly the screaming stopped. I didn't hear what was said, but it worked. Yet again a few minutes later, the screaming continued. You hear me, guys? You better be the best. You better be the best if you want to mess with my family. You took my brother. Today. I don't appreciate you. My brother was a good man. The absolute best. Freaking jerks. I lost a family today. My wife left for work while the screaming was still going. She pleaded for me to call the police. Called them after she left, but they told me they didn't have the staff for domestic disturbances. It was a small town, so I understood they might be busy elsewhere. I decided to take matters into my own hands. I walked towards the neighbor's gates. The shouting seemed as though it was coming from outside the house, but nobody was there. You hear me? I lost a family member today. You hear me, guys? I don't appreciate you. You do not mess with me. The voice of the old woman wavered between the usual screams and a grave snarl, like a dog baring its teeth and growling as I approached the gate. I tried to look around for the source of the noise. The front of the property was dark, and inside the carport was pitch black. I shook the locked gate and noticed it was still chained shut. To my left, I saw a kitchen knife buried to its hilt in the bare red dirt that was her front garden. Then I saw another knife stabbed into the trunk of the mango tree that stood lonely in the garden. You hear me, guys? The voice snarled at me. A lot quieter than before, but it was a lot more menacing. You've got a nerve to show your face around here after what you did to my family. If you thought what you did was bad, you haven't seen what I'll do to you. You think you'll walk away? I don't think so. My uncle is here, my brother is here, and they are not happy. They will see my revenge. She growled again. I still have no idea where she was, so I called out to her. Hey, are you okay? Obviously, she wasn't okay, but heck, I couldn't think of any other way to initiate a conversation. Suddenly, a shadowy figure of an old lady stood up. She had been out of sight, sitting in the shadows behind her blue car in the pitch black of her carport. "Come, so I can see you," she snarled. "I'm just at your front gate. I wanted to see if you are alright. There has been a lot of shouting and I wanted to see if you're okay." I knew the shouting was her. I knew that she didn't have another person around. I was hopeful I could tell her to stop shouting, and that would have been it. The lady approached me as I spoke. She moved slowly as if she had knee problems. I saw her face, and it was weathered. She was smoking a cigarette that was burning her fingers. She realized it instinctually and let it roll away in the breeze. "You okay, sweetheart?" I asked again. Suddenly, she spoke, but her voice changed completely. She spoke in the tone of an elderly lady selling cakes at church. Her voice was softer, and she seemed apologetic. "Listen, I'm sorry. I've been having a few problems," she explained. She continued to approach me, and I noticed yet another knife. A paring knife lying in the shadows in her path where she made her way toward me. I stepped back from the gate. I didn't want to be within arm's reach of her. "Yeah, I noticed," I replied to her. She giggled to herself as she crouched down to pick up the paring knife. I prayed that the sore knees weren't an act, and I would need the head start to get back to my front door, open it, and lock her out before she could catch me if she did go all Norman Bates on me. She reached the gate and stretched out her arm to shake my hand. "Shake my hand," she said sweetly. "No, I'm all right here, thanks," I told her, backing away another half step. "Why are you so rude? You look like a nice boy. People first meet, it's polite to shake hands," she said in a voice that sounded almost upset. "Like I said, I'll just stay here. You have a knife in your hand, and I'm not that comfortable with." "What, this?" she said, brandishing the knife. She stabbed into the wooden fence post the gate was attached to. It stood there handle up, and while I stared at it, I felt this woman's gaze staring right through me. I snapped back to see her, staring at me. "Listen, do you live next door? I've been having a bit of trouble. I buried 2 members of my family this week, as well you know, and I'm having a bit of trouble as they are still with me, and if you hear me singing out, then just ignore me. I sing out and I am talking, and that is none of your business. You have no right to come to my gate and tell me who to speak to and how to speak to them. They are my family and it is not your business. I am talking to them and that has nothing to do with you. Do you understand?" She was angry now and I stepped back. "I understand, and I wasn't aware you had lost your family recently, but you are disturbing us and you're scaring my wife." I tried my best to sound scarier than her, but I don't think she was listening to me at this point. "Listen, what's your wife's name?" "That's not the issue," I replied. "What's your name?" she asked. "What's yours?" I countered. "My name is Rose. Listen, I've been seeing people come around here, and they go in and out of your house when you go out. They mean you harm. They mean me harm too. My uncle and brother are with me, and they already harmed them. Listen, you need to look after your wife, because if someone kills you, they will kill her next. And they won't be as kind to her as they will be to you. You will die quickly. She will really feel the power. It will take hours, and you will watch with me. Yeah, I'm going now. Stop shouting because it's disturbing us. Stop scaring my wife. Good night." I wanted to get around to telling her to keep the noise down in a friendly way. The first request is polite. Hopefully that would put a stop to it. I should have known that this wasn't a rational person I was dealing with before I went over. As I walked away, I kept an eye on her. She took the paring knife out of the post and put it in her bucket. I called the police and reported the whole thing. About an hour later, they arrived. Because there had been a knife involved, they took it seriously. Upon their arrival, the sweet old lady side of her was the only thing they saw. The police told me that there wasn't an issue as far as they were concerned, and that they would not be attending again. I asked if they had seen the knives I had told them about. They claimed there were no knives sighted. The screaming continued every night for hours, sometimes until the early hours of the morning, sometimes only for a few hours in the evening. I requested the police to come out every night, but they said they would come if they had a free moment in their patrols. I called all of the letting agents that covered the area and found out that somebody had bought the house in Rose's name, so she was the owner. I couldn't even make a noise complaint to the letting agent because she was the owner. I called the mental health department at the hospital and was told that because the office was only staffed by one person, they don't do house calls and only evaluate people brought in by police. I recorded her screaming on my phone and took it to police the next morning, who said they couldn't do anything. I told them I literally feared for the lives of my wife and myself. They said they couldn't detain her for a mental health evaluation until she had committed a crime, like stabbing us. I asked if anyone else had complained, and she said that mine weren't the only complaints, but that everyone had been given the same answer. A pair of cops came around on their own accord and witnessed firsthand the screaming and the knife stabbed in the grounds around the property. They warned me to stay away from her, but there was nothing that they could do, as stabbing a knife into your own garden isn't a crime. They asked her to keep it down, and she turned into the sweet old lady again. A month of her screaming later, my wife and I arranged to move to a different house. On our last day, she started to talk to me from her gate as I packed the truck. "You are in a lot of trouble, you know. You two are in a lot of danger now. You do not appreciate the trouble you are causing. You should not be leaving me, and you should not leave me. You hear me? You will carry my burden, and you will carry it with you. Because when they come for me, I will point them straight at you. Move over, Ivan Milat. There is a new psycho in town." This is one of those situations in which we'll probably never know what was really going on. It's haunted us for years. My mom and I were on our way to Nashville, and we'd stop over the Kentucky line at one of those big off-ramp service stations, Pilot, Love's, etc., for a bathroom break. She and I were in different stalls, and not long after we were situated, I heard the door open again. I couldn't see them, but it sounded like the footsteps of a woman and a child. They went into the handicap stall together, and though the child never said a word, the woman never stopped talking. It wasn't her incessant chattering that grabbed my attention, though. It was what she was saying. "You are beautiful. Did you know that? Aren't you just the prettiest girl in the world? Mama." Can you say mama? I'm your mom. You are just so sweet and beautiful. You really are. They were only in there for a minute or so. I could hear her blathering on at the sinks, but when I flushed the toilet and opened the door, she quickly grabbed the little girl by the hand and pulled her out. I got a good look at the child, but only saw the woman from the back. I felt deeply unsettled. I'm standing there washing my hands, mulling over what had happened. When Mom joined me, I felt kind of silly, like I was overreacting, but then Mom goes, "Are you listening to that?" Yes. I was so glad she felt it too. Wasn't that really weird? We talked about it for a few seconds and wondered if we should tell someone. But what would we say? Nothing bad had technically happened. The child hadn't looked or acted scared either. Back in the store, nobody was frantically running around searching for their child. There were video cameras up that would catch most everything. The woman had been strange, but it didn't feel like she was hiding the child or on a time crunch. We grabbed drinks and paid, but as we got out to the car, we saw them again. As it turned out, they were parked next to us, and we couldn't get in until they closed their doors. This time, they were accompanied by a middle-aged, unkempt man. He was barking orders at them, trying to move them along, and the little girl was staring down at her shoes. She looked sad. When he saw us standing at our car, he glared and muttered under his breath, but I didn't know if that was for our benefit or theirs. Their car was full of crap. The rear window was packed full of papers, clothes, and garbage, and the passenger side back seat had clothes or hangers dangling down in front of the window. There was very little room in the back for the girl. The couple ushered her into the car and then quickly hung a blanket in the other window, effectively blocking her from view. Nobody from the outside could see into the back seat where the child was sitting. They pulled out of there like a bat out of hell, but I managed to memorize the license plate. I wasn't even consciously trying to. Everything just happened so fast. Mom pulled out a piece of paper and we jotted it down, as well as the make, model, and color of the vehicle. At first we felt silly calling the police after all. We were still going on feelings. They hadn't really done anything wrong. Although the rear window obstruction could have gotten them in trouble, people can do things that look crazy out of context. We did call though. The local police turned us over to the state police, who took our information, but they didn't want to come and talk to us any further. In fact, they acted like they were a little bit put off over the call. After telling them the story, we felt like the weird ones or Karens before we called them Karen. I was embarrassed, but it still felt right to do. Once we reached Nashville, we actually watched the news, wondering if we would see any reports about an abduction. Nothing. I've done a few searches over the years, but haven't uncovered anything or anyone who would have physically matched the age and gender of the child. I felt conflicted about calling the police because it felt so invasive. I'm generally a stay-in-your-own-lane kind of person. Chances are that this was an innocent situation. New foster parents, adoption, or just weird people doing weird stuff. But still I wonder. This happened around 2000 or 2001, so many years ago. It was summer break and my family, didn't go on any trip, unlike every break. I was just 8 years old and my younger sister was 3. We were playing along with other kids who lived in the same building as us, just on different floors. The building is not exactly an apartment building. It's more of a multi-storied house. The front gate is a bit further from there and the only entrance and the exit to the building. So since we were downstairs and playing, anybody who would enter or exit the building would be visible to us and we would greet them because every tenant knows us and we know them, as well as their family members who might visit them. A new person visiting any tenant is rare but not impossible. Right adjacent to the big entrance gate is a small old-style window with a grill, but it has a small opening at the bottom. We were all playing, but then I got tired and sat on one of the chairs placed at the porch-like place. Not sure what to call it, to be honest. From where the window thingy falls on my right side, I can see it as well as the gate clearly. I was just looking out when I noticed a man staring at the gate. So, basically, he was able to look at my sister and friends through it. It concerned me when I realized that he wasn't even trying to look away and was just staring at them blankly. I turned around from where I was sitting to signal my friend to move to the other side away from his sight, which she didn't understand. Frustrated, I turned back and was about to stand up when my gaze fell on the guy and he was now staring at me. My body froze and I could feel fear creeping up on me. I couldn't move. I don't know why I stared back at him and suddenly he started smiling. And when I say smiling, I mean full-on grinning from ear to ear. That scared the soul out of me, and I mustered some courage, got up, and ran towards my friends. I didn't tell them anything and just asked them to go upstairs with me, which thankfully they did without questioning. I didn't tell them anything about this to my parents because I thought they would stop me from going downstairs to play. The next day, we again came to play and I looked through the window just to make sure he wasn't there. Fortunately, he wasn't, or so I thought. 15 minutes in and I spot that guy again. He was again standing at the very spot and staring at us. At me. I tried to play it cool because my friends knew nothing about him, but I couldn't for long and we went back again. From what I remember, this happened for 3 to 4 days and now my friends started complaining about how I don't let them play and they have to come back earlier than they are supposed to. On the 5th day, or 4th, I don't remember correctly, I made up my mind to not pay attention to him and just focus on playing. We were playing cricket that evening, and I was batting. I hit the ball hard, causing it to go over the gate, which was a normal thing. And as per rules made by us, the one responsible must fetch the ball. My heart started beating hard because I could see his grin getting wider and creepier. He went towards the ball on the road and picked it up. He then held his hand out, gesturing me to come and take it. I was scared at this point, but I had to go, so I did. As soon as I reached to take the ball from his hand, he bent, coming closer to my ear, and his words are still ringing clearly in my ears to this day. I'm a good man. Look at the window when you go inside. I'll leave something for you. This is a rough translation in English, but it sounded much worse. That sent shivers down my spine, and I ran with the speed of light. After we were done playing, I saw him sliding a piece of paper from that little opening. He then looked at me, grinned, and waved goodbye. I grabbed the paper and opened it. He had written his phone number and asked me to call him at 2 sharp in the afternoon and said that he knew my parents would be asleep by that time. It was also written that if I didn't do it, my friends' lives would be in danger. As an 8-year-old, I didn't know any better, so I called him through my mom's phone. He picked up the call and didn't have the courage to say anything, so I was quiet. He said, "You're a good girl just like me. You should come stay with me. Come outside, I'm waiting to pick you up." Because I lived upstairs, I went to the balcony and he was actually standing near the gate, looking directly at me, waving and smiling. I couldn't contain it anymore, so I started crying and disconnected the call. I ran inside and bawled my eyes out in my room. Thankfully, my mom didn't wake up and I cried it all out. I didn't go out for the next few weeks and everybody kept asking me about it. I still didn't tell them though. That guy stopped coming too. I don't remember the time he stopped coming, but he did, and I was relieved. Eventually, this experience started fading and I grew up. Fast forward to 10 years, I was 18 and my mom asked me to buy some snacks. I took my sister and went out. The shop I had to go to was at the end of the road several houses away, so not too far. I was standing in a queue when I left. I was standing in a queue when I felt uncomfortable because the man standing behind me kept pushing me. Annoyed, I looked at him only to realize it was the same man. My face went pale and I could feel my heart throbbing in my throat. Trying not to panic and calm myself down by telling myself that he couldn't do anything in public, that there were tons of people there, and that gave me a sense of security. As soon as my order came, I took out my wallet hastily to pay, but he beat me to it. The owner looked at him weirdly and then at me because I was a regular there and he was seeing this man for the first time. I paid for it anyway, and the owner politely asked him to take his money back. I gave the bag to my sister and asked her to go home and to inform our mom about a man following us. Just in case he attacks, I'll have a backup and she would be safe too. Our house is within the vision range of the shop, so I waited for her to get inside, and now it was my turn to go home. As soon as I stepped out, the man followed me and said something like, "You're a beautiful lady now. Let's catch up." Again, rough translation. I kept walking and walking, but now that we were far from the shop, he started his speed walking and I had to walk faster. I could feel goosebumps all over my body. I started running and I could see him catching up to my speed when the owner called for him loudly, saying that some of his money was still at the counter and asking him to come back, which gave me enough time to get inside and lock the gate. I haven't seen him since that day and it's been 2 years. I'm 20 right now and I hope to never meet him anywhere in the future. I hope I never see him again, and I don't know why it has instilled a paranoia in me, and I dread seeing him when I turn 28. Edit. I told my mom everything after that. Because my dad lives in another city for work, I didn't tell him since it would make him very worried and possibly affect his work. My distant uncle is a local cop. He's quite close and trustworthy. We tried finding the creepy guy after that but couldn't. He literally vanished in thin air. We also asked the shop owner about him, but he said the guy came back, took his money and went away. Nobody else paid enough attention to this guy, so we couldn't find anything. I go to college by public transport, so I have to walk around 1 kilometer to reach the stop. I take the other road, which is opposite to the road that leads to the shop. It takes longer comparatively, but I feel better at least. Not once have I seen that guy or felt anything creepy since then, which is a relief. But again, I'm kind of paranoid every time I step out, though I do carry pepper spray and a sharp keychain with me all the time. About moving out, we cannot afford that just yet, possibly after I complete my degree, which still has 3 years left. I've been lurking on here for a while and meaning to share this incident on here for a while. I'm ill and off work today, so I decided today's the day. Illness may cause some typos, however, so please accept apologies in advance. I have had more than my fair share of creepy encounters, but this one was particularly dramatic. One where I really did feel my life was in danger. Names have been changed to protect the dignity of my 2 cousins, who are now self-conscious teens who I know occupy Reddit. I was on holiday visiting my family in South Asia. Having been born and brought up in England, a lot of things over there are quite foreign to me, relevant for later on. My parents and I were staying at my uncle's apartment. My aunt and uncle were at work, and my parents had gone away for a day trip to visit relatives in a neighboring town, leaving me at home with my 2 cousins, Hamish and Adam. Adam was 8 years old at the time, and Hamish was 3. I was about 12 or 13. Adam and Hamish always argued about everything. If one wanted a particular cereal at breakfast, an argument would break out over breakfast choices. Adam is stupid for wanting Cocoa Pops. My Shreddies are so much better. I'm not even going to sit here and eat while he eats that horrible rubbish, while playing with a toy. Let's make the doll swim in the lake. No, it's not a lake, stupid, it's the sea. And so on. In short, I was very used to them disagreeing and squabbling and couldn't remember any time they were in harmony, especially over playtime. This may seem like a digression, but it is relevant background information for later on. On this particular day, Hamish was in the living room building a Lego boat. He had been working on this boat for a few days now. Adam had gone outside to play with his friends on the street. He left the door slightly ajar so he could come and go. It was a hot and humid day as usual, so I went to take a shower. I was sitting in my room drying my hair when Hamish came running to me in tears. "Tashina, my boat, it's broken." "What?" "My Lego boat. Somebody stepped on it and broke it." "Oh." He grasped my hand and led me to the living room where the boat was snapped. He was very upset. It had been his pride and joy, and so I commiserated and reassured him that all hope was not lost. It shouldn't take too long to fix. I thought he must have broken it himself by accident, perhaps stepping on it and not realizing he had been working on the floor with the boat sitting on the living room rug. With Hamish finally placated and back to work on his boat, I went back to my room. A few minutes passed without incident. I could hear Hamish moving around, and I heard Adam come back inside and go to the living room. I got a book and curled up on the bed. It was a lazy, drowsy sort of day. And then all of that was shattered. Adam and Hamish came charging into my room, almost tripping over each other. Tashina, Tashina. Hamish ran to me. Adam paused to slam the bedroom door closed behind him. There's a man in the living room. He's wearing a mask and he had a knife. He must have been the one who broke my boat. Wait. I looked at the pair of ashen faces, completely solemn. Are you playing some sort of game right now? No. He's wearing a horribly scary mask and he has a knife. I got up slowly, still not sure whether they were messing with me, play acting, and this was some sort of pretend game. Where? In the living room, said Adam, pointing. He's wearing a mask? Yeah, like a Halloween one, with a big scary smile on it, said Adam. Smile showing teeth, said Hamish, nodding along furiously. And he had a knife, said Adam. A big one, said Hamish. Yeah, said Adam. They both looked entirely serious and terrified, looking at me with their upturned, earnest, and pleading faces. I think more than anything, it was the fact that they agreed upon the description of this man and what he was carrying that really cemented for me the fact they were telling the truth. If this had been some sort of pretend game, they would have disagreed by now, trying to outdo each other in what he was wearing or the weapon he was carrying. Instinctively, I went to the door. I wasn't sure why or to achieve what purpose, I guess. I still wasn't scared. I knew they were telling the truth, but could there be an innocent explanation? They were overexcitable kids. My hand went to the door handle. No, said Adam in a hiss, and they both came running towards me, their hands clawing at me. Don't go out there. Wait. Okay, so let me get this straight. He was in the living room? They nodded. What was he doing? How did you manage to escape? Did he threaten you? I was sitting on the sofa to watch TV, said Adam. Hamish was on the floor with his boat. The man came in and we saw the knife in his hands. What happened then? Was he pointing it at you? No, it was just in his hands. As soon as we saw him, he just ran and came to you. The living room has two doors. One that leads to a corridor that basically snakes around the front of the building, and the other one leads to a corridor to the inside of the apartment. The boys had taken this latter doorway, with the man presumably standing by the first one. The story did indeed make sense. It had come so suddenly, and it was taking me a while to actually process the seriousness of what they were telling me. There was an intruder inside the apartment with a knife, and I was the oldest, and I was in charge. They had come to me for protection. Oh man, what do I do? Okay, let's not panic. What we need to do is to phone the police. Mobiles were still not common in this era. The only phone in the apartment was the landline, and luckily it was right outside my room. It was on the table in the corridor facing the door to my room. Unlucky, however, it was not a cordless phone. However, if the cord were long enough, I might be able to grab the whole thing, pull it inside, and close the door. I rehearsed this in my mind. I need to get to the phone so we can call the police. No, the man won't get you, said Hamish, clinging to my arm. He might be in the corridor, said Adam. We were all suddenly whispering, I realized. Well, we can check, I said, my hand going for the handle. No, hissed Adam. He grabbed my hand. It's dangerous. Look, I'll just peek, okay? If he's there, I can quickly close the door. Adam eventually, though reluctantly, agreed. I turned the handle slowly. My stomach felt tight as I did so. The tension of the boys standing next to me did not help matters. I eased the door away from its frame, pulling it as slowly and noiselessly as possible. When it was slightly ajar, I pressed my face into the gap and looked around. The corridor was dark and empty. Okay, I said, turning to face the boys. There is no one there. I'm going to sneak outside and grab the phone and come back. Okay? As soon as I get back in with the phone, you close the door behind me. It's only a couple of steps to the phone. It'll just take a few seconds. Don't worry, okay? Adam was a mess, wringing his hands, pleading with me not to go. Hamish stood stoic, nodding. I pulled the door open further and stepped outside. Hamish and Adam crowded into the space I had just vacated, peering out of the doorway to watch me. As I stepped outside into the empty, quiet corridor, I began to feel silly. Could this just be the boys' active imagination? Had they been seeing something on TV and become convinced it was real? Maybe I was being stupid. Maybe there was nobody here. I was feeling much calmer and incredulous about the situation. Still, I knew it was possible. Better to be safe than sorry. I would take the phone inside and call my uncle to come home. I stepped up to the table and looked at the phone, quickly assessing it. I tugged on the cord that plugged into the wall. Yes, it should be long enough to take inside. I picked up the whole thing and looked up. He was standing there, wearing a clown-like grinning mask, and he had a knife in his hand surely. I don't think I need to tell you it was the most stomach-dropping, terrifying moment. The shock and fright felt like somebody had just smacked my face. I couldn't even scream. I dropped the phone and just leapt back to the door, charging back inside the room, slamming into Adam and Hamish as I did so. All three of us banged the door shut. Adam and Hamish stood, leaning against the door, and I dragged my bed into adrenaline-fueled frenzy over to the door to barricade it. There was no lock on the door. Would the bed be strong enough? Heavy enough? I began piling everything I could think of onto the bed to make it heavier. Hamish and Adam wordlessly joined in. The books, the bookshelf, all my bags, my suitcase, my clothes, the clock and everything. And then we all sat down on the bed, clambering onto it, leaning against the upper part of the door to make sure it couldn't open. Now that all this was still, we just looked at each other. Adam began to cry. Not Hamish, the younger one, but Adam, just bawling in a thin, whiny voice. Wow, we're going to die, he wailed. No, we are not going to die, I said, though my heart was still pounding painfully against my chest and in my ears. I was going to be sick. I was shaking. Hamish was just sitting quietly next to me, his little hands folded across his chest. We're going to die, Adam said again. Okay, calm down, guys. What can we do? I thought about it frantically. He can't stay there forever. We'll just wait until he goes away. I don't think I'll ever forget that image. Little Hamish, 3 years old, sitting next to me looking solemn. His legs out in front of him, clad in those little jeans with his hands clasped in his lap. His back is leaning against the door. Adam was on the other side of me. His knees pulled to his chest, tears streaming down his face, making whimpering noises. All of us in a row barricaded against the door. We could hear footsteps in the corridor occasionally. The time pressed on, but our tension didn't wane. With every passing second, we expected to hear a thud on the door. The man trying to get in. Thankfully, it didn't happen. We eventually heard my aunt come in, talking in the corridor, wondering where we were, calling us. It was amazing, but there was a tinge of dread in case the man was still in the apartment, in case he might attack her. We, all three of us, clambered off of the bed and pulled it away from the door, hastily running outside. We told her what happened and we searched the place, emboldened by the presence of an adult. There was no sight of the man. The frustrating thing was, though my aunt and uncle, when he got back from work, didn't believe us at all. She thought we were flat out lying for entertainment, which I found particularly undermining, given that at 12 or 13 years old, immature for my age, I would never make up something as serious as that. First, she laughed and rolled her eyes, waving us away. When we persisted and repeated, insisting it really did happen and we were telling the truth, she eventually grew tired and told us to stop. I still find it astonishing how lightly they sometimes take the complaints of children. We were shaken up for the rest of the day and felt very indignant, having been just shooed away after something so terrifying had happened. When my parents got back, we told them, and it was some solace that they did indeed take us seriously. They knew that it was completely out of character for me to just dream up or lie about something like that. My aunt and uncle, however, still didn't agree. Later in the evening, we were getting ready to go out to dinner. We heard my aunt cry out in surprise, and my uncle rushed to go and see what had happened. It turns out all of her jewelry was gone. That was when they finally did indeed believe that we had been telling the truth and there had indeed been an intruder. When I was about 16, 9 years ago, my family was living in a suburban area outside of LA. It was a nice neighborhood. Kids rode their bikes in a group, parents waved to each other, and people helped keep an eye on houses. You could even join a barbecue if you walked by at the right time. Well, my dad was working nights at a hospital in the city and left me, female 16, my mom, female 36, and my sister 12, and my brother 8, home midnight from 6:30 p.m. to 7:30 a.m. the next day. One night we were cooking and listening to music and all just around having a good night, and everyone's in bed by 9. I am woken up to the sound of our front door being rattled and my mom calling for my dad like he is home. Our house was laid out like this. There was a front door and a small entryway, and the right side wall, facing the door from outside, was my brother's room. My sister and I were on the other side of him, and the doorway led into our dining room. My mom's house was all from the living room towards the back of the house, so they typically turned on lights to come by our rooms. It wasn't all that uncommon for my dad to get let off of a shift a few hours early and end up home before 7. My front door was frosted glass in the middle that was clear enough that we could see whoever was at the door. It was old and a little off, so typically you had to put a little more force into opening the door, even if it were unlocked. This part my mom filled in. She had gotten up, also hearing the door, and thought my dad was home as I did. However, upon calling out for my dad to confirm and turning on the light switch, whoever it was at the door froze and noticeably jumped. She had still been walking closer to the door to open it to help him, still asleep, when she realized the man in the doorway was as tall as my dad but had a full head of hair, as well as his outline not matching the familiar outline of my dad coming home in the scrubs. This man was wider than my dad, and once he could see my mom in the doorway, he started not only turning the knob, but also throwing himself against the frosted glass. Okay, back to what I know. I don't know what kept me from rolling over and going back to bed, but in the next few seconds, I heard my mom scream and sat up in time to hear the footsteps and see her as she disappeared into her bedroom to come back out with the revolver my dad had bought for her birthday. At this point, I had rolled over and checked my cell phone quickly to see it was 1:30 in the morning and had dialed 911 while my mom was pointing the gun at whoever was at the door, trying to force their way inside. "Stop, or I'll shoot you. I'm on the phone with the police and they're on their way. I will use force if you enter my home." My mom was screaming it at the huge man at the door, who, after hearing her the second and the third time, finally stepped back from the door and was just staring at our shapes from the other side of the frosted glass. After a moment's thought, he seemed to like his chances because he had stepped forward again and only ran once my mom pulled the pin back and repeated what she had been saying, adding that she might decide to not even wait for him to be inside. He ran off, as I mentioned, and I stayed on the phone with 911 as my mom stood at the doorway, her gun still in both hands, aimed at the door the way my dad had taught her to hold it just the weekend before when we'd all gone to the range. It was only a moment after the man had fled that 2 uniformed officers filled the doorway the man had just been in, and when they knocked, I realized, after she didn't respond to them identifying themselves, how terrified my mom was. Her voice shook as she told the officers that she had a weapon, but that she wanted to hear their badge numbers before she would open the door so I could confirm with the dispatcher. Once they did, she opened the revolver and unloaded it, putting it on the table and crying as I opened the door for the police. They took our statements, of course, had several patrol cars out looking, and found him a few hours later 6 blocks from our home. However, he made it to the residence he was trying to break into, and they caught him in the middle of robbing the retired couple he had knocked unconscious. This happened back in the 90s when I was still in primary school, so I really had no clue how much danger I was in. I would have been around 11 years old, living in a regional city in Australia. For the last year, I had been having a lot of trouble at school, getting bullied a bit by classmates and feeling really singled out by my teacher. My mom worked around the corner from my school, so when everything would get too much at school, I would literally just walk out of class, down the road, and onto her work site. It would take me about half an hour to walk there along a main road. A couple of times, I noticed a small white car drive past me slowly, but I only noticed this because I would see the same car go up and down the street as I was walking and while I was sitting outside of my mom's work site. After a while, I started seeing the same car driving up my street at home and parked along the streets that my brother and I would ride our bikes around on. I don't remember thinking it was strange because it was a small town and it wasn't unusual to see the same cars or people. It was just like, oh, there goes that car again. Anyways, my family followed a serious routine. Mondays, swimming and tutoring. Tuesdays were netball training. Wednesdays were netball games. Thursdays were basketball training. And Fridays, we would go and see professional basketball or football depending on the season. Saturday was my brother's basketball game, and Sundays were our day to go to the river with our friends for swims and a barbecue lunch. Never changed unless somebody was sick. So one Friday night, I am dressed and ready to go to watch the basketball game, but I can't find my shoes. I am pretty sure they are in the car, which is in a garage under our 2-story house. To get it, I have to walk down the outside steps at the front of the house, which has a full view of the road. I walk out the front door, and at the end of our driveway is a small white car. Now, I have never taken that much notice of white cars up until this point, and it wasn't uncommon for cars to park in this exact spot or our neighbors, but I just got a sinking feeling in my stomach when I looked at it. I kept walking down the stairs, and as I got close to the bottom, the driver's side door opened and a man gets out quickly. I keep walking towards the garage and he starts moving towards our driveway. That was the point when something inside me just told me to scream for my parents and to run and lock myself in the car. I did exactly that, and this guy, who was halfway up my driveway at this point, turned around, ran back to his car and drove off. By the time my parents came out, there was no evidence that this had happened and they didn't believe me. A week later, there was a notice in our school's newsletter about a man in a white car attempting to abduct another child from my school on the same night. My parents were very shaken and took me seriously after reading that. I don't believe he was ever caught, but it definitely taught me to listen to my intuition and take notice of my surroundings. On April 30th, 2019, I was staying at the Crossroads Hotel in Kansas City. I was there for 2 weeks for work, but with nothing to do over the weekend and no friends in town. At around 9 p.m., I decided to have a drink at the bar by myself. I had just ordered my first beer. I emphasize ordered here. I had not even received the drink. Therefore, I was not drunk and my mental state was still sober, and a girl tugged on my shirt. He was really attractive and I was single at the time, so I turned to say hello. She whispered in my ear that the man next to her was being really creepy and if I could help her out and pretend to be her boyfriend, she would buy me a drink. I will be honest, I thought this was just a line, but I obliged because frankly she was hot. But there really was an old man, late 50s or early 60s, rocking back and forth in his chair, eyes half open, clearly 2 sheets to the wind, and he was in a tuxedo. I asked him about the tux, and he said that his daughter just got married that day. The wedding party had a room block at the hotel, and he was keeping the post-reception tab open at the bar. At this point, he started hitting on the girl, who we will call Rachel, saying how beautiful she was and how lucky I was to have such a beautiful girlfriend, and staring at her. I really felt for her and all women, honestly, in that moment. Then Rachel wrapped her arms around my waist and said, "Yep, this is my boyfriend. I love him to death. I'd kill for this guy." The guy rocks back and forth in his chair and then goes, "I get it. I've killed for love before, too." We looked at each other. I thought I misheard him. I'm sorry, what'd you say?" I said I have killed for love before. For the next 10 minutes, he proceeded to tell us about the supposed murder he committed. It was his ex-wife's boyfriend from what I could tell. He was divorced, probably reluctantly. His wife remarried and he got jealous of the guy. How he killed him with a Glock 37 shot 3 times, twice in the chest and once in the head. And what he did with the body: wrapped the body in black plastic bags, went fishing in the lake behind his house one morning, and threw it overboard with weights tied to the legs. I could tell he was growing suspicious of us asking so many questions, so I figured it was time to leave. Then I was actually proud of this. I actually got his name. I said, "It was nice to meet you, mister." And he filled in the blank. The next morning, I asked the front desk manager, who I have become friends with over the years of traveling there, if there was someone staying there with that name. She said she couldn't give me a room number for security reasons, but confirmed that somebody was staying there with that name. I called the Kansas City Police Department tip hotline and I told them everything I knew. I have a tipster ID number and everything. I check maybe once a month or so to see if there have been any arrests, but no dice so far. I really thought this guy was messing with me, but the more I thought about it, the more I thought maybe not. I could totally see somebody having this weight on their heart, feeling vulnerable at their daughter's wedding, being drunk enough to feel untouchable, and trying to get it off their chest. His one mistake was that I was sober at the time and remember everything. Send a PM if you know of any unsolved murders that match this description. This happened a few years ago between my first and second years of grad school. It was summer and I had scored a last-minute internship with a small ad agency several states away from where I lived. Luckily, I have family who live in the same city, so I was able to stay with my aunt, uncle, and cousin for the 2 months I was interning. My relatives are great and a lot of fun to hang out with. This was the summer Pokemon Go came out, and we got a lot of mileage out of that one. All the same, I was still a 20-something extrovert in a new city. Obviously, I started meeting new people through Tinder. That summer was a parade of weirdness, including such hits as the guy who sent hilariously overpost nudes from his workplace, and the guy who I thought ghosted me but was in fact hospitalized following a crazy incident I don't want to talk about here. The difference between those guys and the subject of this story is that, unfortunate nudes and mental health struggles aside, they were both very nice people. But this guy not so much. The city where I was staying is home to a pretty sizable Navy base, so a lot of the guys I came across were military. As a rule, I don't go for anyone whose profession involves combat, weapons, or violence in general, like military personnel, cops, boxers, etc. But I figured this was just for the summer. So when I headed off with this Navy MP, I agreed to an in-person date. Given that I was dating quite a bit, I made a habit of always meeting guys at the same pub or restaurant down in the town center. So we arranged to meet there, and when the night came, I went through my usual first date routine. Get there half an hour early, do a shot of gnarly bottom self tequila to calm my nerves, and start in on beer number 1. About halfway through that beer, in comes my date. Resplendent in a rhinestone-studded affliction t-shirt, the likes of which I hadn't seen on a real person in at least 5 years. Little did I know the bad wardrobe was the least of his issues. Pretty much right off the bat, I was a little uncomfortable. He started talking about doing drugs, which really isn't my thing, and a lot of racist jokes towards Latinos, which, like affliction, I hadn't encountered in a hot minute. He was Latino, so it wasn't like he was being racist really, but I'm white and feel weird laughing at racial jokes, so that was fun. The more awkward I feel, the more I drink, so bottoms up. But then it went from mere bad first date etiquette to a little troubling. Basically, he committed the cardinal first date sin of bringing up his ex-girlfriend. Actually, multiple of them, and some common threads emerged pretty quickly. Namely, that he had treated them all like princesses, and they all had been unfaithful to him. He had been the perfect boyfriend supposedly, and they were all evil Jezebels. His utter belief in his own victimhood was uncomfortable to say the least, especially combined with the sneering disgust that dripped off each sentence. I'm pretty sure every woman knows that a guy bringing up his ex unprompted and reciting a litany of her sins against him is a big red flag. I'd already decided by this point that we probably weren't going to be going out again. At some point, I made a joke in passing about the fact that the uncle I was staying with is a retired senior chief and could totally look him up. Aha, fun joke, or so I thought. Apparently, he took it very seriously because he then, oh so casually but very deliberately, disclosed that a woman in his unit had accused him of assaulting her. Look at him go, like a stage magician pulling a string of red flags, one after the other from his sleeve. He went on to say that it was of course total BS. She just wanted to get the heck out of Bahrain and thought it would get her reassigned. This was absolutely no big deal to him, and he painted it as a typical of females in the military. If I hadn't before, I would have gotten the sense at that point that, for all he ostensibly liked me, or at least wanted a shot at sleeping with me, he had a decidedly shifty view of women in general. Around this point, I stopped ordering beers and instead ordered myself some fries. It was time to sober up and bail. Unfortunately, sobering up took a minute, and in that time, he went on to tell me about another false accusation in his life, of the same thing. This time, it was his little half-sister accusing their father of molesting her. This again was no big deal to him, saying she was lying of course, under the direction of her bitch mother, who thought it would get her sole custody. Yet another alley in the how much does this guy hate women column, and pure vitriol in his voice when he talked about this was disturbing. Now, regardless of whether any of these accusations were true or just as unfounded as he portrayed them, he had chosen to bring up the following: his cheating whore exes, his lying bitch fellow sailor, his lying little sister, and her scheming mother, all over the course of like 2 hours with a woman he barely knew. He spoke in a non-derogatory way exactly about one woman, his abuela. Every other woman he had ever met was, in his eyes, a liar, horrible person, a manipulator, or some combination of thereof. Thankfully, I sobered up pretty quickly after that and declined his offer to walk me to my car. Once I was home, I shook it off pretty easily. I'm used to this kind of thing, unfortunately. But the more I thought about it the next day, and many times since, the more I realized it was one of those situations that could have gone really, really bad. Had I let him walk me to my car, I think I would have been in a dark half-empty parking garage with a guy who at best low-key hates women, and at worst actually assaulted a woman and casually mentioned it to me over drinks. The red flags from that conversation alone were so huge and obvious that, had something happened, my credibility would have been shot. People would have come out in droves to say I was at fault for putting myself in that situation with somebody who was so clearly disturbed. I honestly count my lucky stars nothing came of it, because it was another sad case of victim blaming waiting to happen. I recently went on a date with a guy from my school who I met on a dating app. He seemed super sweet and charming over text, so I agreed to go on a date with him, especially after two friends told me they knew him from a class where he was a generally funny guy. He went to a small, pretty prestigious university, which also made me sure that he'd be normal. He was supposed to meet me at 6 to go on a picnic, but ended up picking me up at 8:30. He texted me to reschedule to 8 and ended up showing at that time. He drove me to his apartment, and although uncomfortable, I agreed to go in because of everything I already knew about him. The apartment was only lit with one candle and a small glowing light on the floor, which didn't add much. It was a multiple bedroom apartment that he lived alone in, which made it even more odd. We talked and ate some food, and he seemed nervous and uneasy for most of it. He suddenly switched the conversation to our deepest, darkest secrets, and asked if I'd ever seriously thought about killing anyone. After I said no, he made up a story about being in the Navy and having to bomb a ship and killing at least 5 people. When I was unsure how to respond, he sort of just passed it off as a joke and said that he had seriously thought about killing someone else, his ex's current boyfriend. I was extremely uncomfortable at this point and wanted to leave, and he agreed to drive me home. Before we left, he said he wanted to show something to me and pulled out a rifle that he pointed in my direction. When I got startled, he remained eerily calm and said he got it for hunting, but couldn't think of even killing an animal. We left, and I got back to my friend's place safely. Everyone I've told this story to has been flabbergasted about how the date went, and I can't shake the feeling that something was off about him and it's creeping me out. And to clarify, I mean something more sinister about him. Any thoughts on this would be appreciated. When I was 24, I decided to experience life abroad, so I joined a program to become an au pair, fancy words for nanny in the USA. This is my messed up story. It isn't creepy, just all messed up. A family interviewed me and decided to pick me as their in-home nanny for their 2-year-old girl and their 4-year-old boy. The family lived in a pretty well-off area in San Francisco, and the couple was still married and in their mid-40s. So 3 months after I was interviewed, I finally arrived, but they couldn't pick me up, so I sent a driver to get me at the airport. I struck up a conversation with the guy since it was sort of a long drive and I was new to the city, and I wanted to know what there was to do and such. Then we reached my future home to be for the entire year. This lady told me that there was one rule in her home, but she had never mentioned to me the months before, and her rule was that I was never to say no to the kids. I finally met the kids, who were quite lovely, and the boy immediately liked me. I am a sporty person, so I decided to take BJJ and Muay Thai as activity, since I used to train back in my hometown. This will be relevant later on. About a week into my moving, she gave me this talk about this book she was reading that said that kids want to control everything, and the only things kids could control were eating, pooping, and changing their diapers. So if the kids didn't want to eat or take a crap or change their diapers, I couldn't push them to. That their bodies were wise enough to tell them when the diaper was bothering them, when they were hungry, etc. I had never seen a kid crying like crazy when you asked them to change their diapers, but that's what the 2-year-old would do. And of course, I was forbidden to say no to them, and I also had to let them be in control, so they never ate when I was supposed to feed them, but when they felt like it. She also told me that they didn't believe in spanking, timeouts, or any kind of punishment, so what I was to do when the kids were beating the ever-living crap out of each other was say, stop, grab the aggressor, and try to get them to be empathetic with the victim. So one day, the 2-year-old really wanted my phone, and I hid it inside my pocket, and bam, she slapped me across the face. Her mom saw her and tried to have a talk with her, telling her that hurt me, that I could cry. Has anyone ever tried to actually reason with a 2-year-old? She wasn't being successful, so she eventually just took the kid away. Then there was this huge incident where I took the kids to take a bath, and apparently the water didn't go, which isn't true, so she forbade me to ever take the kids for another bath since she was afraid that I would leave the water there and the 2-year-old, who loved baths, would try to go in and fall and drown. I explained to her that I would have never expected the water not to go since I was quite sure I lifted that thing that blocks the plumbing, and that we never went upstairs, and when we did, I made sure to close the bathroom and even the toilet's lid. But she wouldn't believe me and somehow implied I left the water there on purpose to drown the kids. Then she told me she didn't feel comfortable with the kids going in my room because there was a window nearby and she feared the kids would jump from the bed to the window and fall 2 floors to their death, which was quite hard since they would have needed to climb to the bed and then to a chair and then the window. It just made no sense. She was crazy about organic stuff. Every single item she had inside her fridge and kitchen was organic, including the kids' candies. I was allowed to have my own candy and sweets as long as I kept them hidden from the kids. However, when I showed up with a Coke, she wasn't too happy. One time we took a trip to some organic ice cream place and I got a chocolate ice cream. And as I was pouring it in my cup, she came right next to me and said, "That has aspartame, don't you know? That's really bad for your brain. If I were you, I wouldn't eat it. Please don't ever give that to my kids." After that, there were all these weird things she used to tell me. Like one day, I left some chicken that I no longer wanted to eat, so I just set it aside to have later on. The next day, she had a talk with me, telling me that food on plates absolutely grossed her out, that she didn't even clean her husband's plate, so why would she do it for someone else? To which I replied, I had set it aside to eat later. And her face fell to the ground. She said, "You ate that? That was sitting out for a long time and it has bacteria. You'll get sick." I mean, it's San Francisco cold, and the food wasn't out for days, but just for a couple of hours. She kept telling me things to scare me into staying home. Things like there are raccoons outside, so here's a flashlight so you can scare them away, but there are also coyotes, so you might want to not stay out too late. Which sounded quite weird, given that we were in the city. That place in town is super dangerous, or there are plenty of thieves over there. In another nice part of the city where another nanny lived. Anyways, one day she calls me and asks me to have a cup of coffee with her, which surprised me since we both live in the same house and it wasn't like we were friends to just go for a coffee. So I came and she tells me that she feels we're not a good match, that she thinks I should move to another family, that she has loads of negative feedback about me, and overall, it had been quite such a horrible experience. And I was quite shocked and asked her what kind of feedback, but she couldn't tell me, or just wouldn't tell me because it was so much. She had already called the au pair agency representative, who turned out to be this extremely dumb lady who explained to me that I had 2 weeks to find a new family or else I had to go back home to my country. I had only been in San Francisco for 2.5 weeks. In the meantime, my host mom was saying that she and her husband had booked a room in a hotel for me 3 days, and that maybe I should go stay somewhere else. The agent is listening to all of this and she feels quite happy with herself after negotiating that I should stay for 1 week with the family that wants me out ASAP, so I can make a bit more cash and then I should ask friends to stay with them or something. Because although she was supposed to make sure the nannies were fine, she couldn't have me at her place since she didn't even have a mattress or a couch for me to stay on. My host mom then tells me that during the time I stay with them, she would control my cell phone to make sure I didn't abuse it and that she would be very, very scared to have me around the kids. I was like, what? I'm a decent person. I'm not a criminal or anything. Why would the kids pay for the fact that you don't like me? However, I told her that if she wanted me out, I was fine with that and that I cared to say goodbye to the kids, but that was about it. I could be gone the next day, and she was like, "Honey, don't get me wrong, but they won't even remember you." And she got pretty offended that I wasn't exactly upset about leaving her family. The next day I came out of my room and didn't want to be near the kids that much since she had this fear that I would kill them or something. She told me that I could just go ahead and lock myself in my room the whole day if I want to. So I did just that, but a friend of mine texted me she was going downtown and asked me if I wanted to come with so I could get a new phone so that the new host families could reach me, since I was required to give up my phone at the end of that week. So I left the home and I started running late and I sent her a message telling her that I was going to be a bit later than I thought, but that I just didn't feel comfortable around her and that I felt like I was a threat to the kids and overall, that I felt bad about the situation. So what she did was immediately call the agency and tell them that I threatened her and her family. The agency called me right away and told me that I was not supposed to go back to her home anymore or she would call the police on me. Also, I couldn't get to my stuff without somebody from the agency present, and it might be the case that the agent would actually have to do my suitcase for me since I might not be allowed inside the home anymore. She texted me and said I was not to come to her place at all, and she immediately canceled the phone and the cards. I was shocked. I told them that regardless of how good my English might be, it's still my second language and it is expected that I make a few mistakes. That she was already treating me like I was a criminal and a monster, and I obviously didn't like that. But they weren't listening to me and said, "Look, just stay somewhere until 8 p.m. When we can go get you, we're too busy right now." So I was left completely confused. I hadn't had any breakfast that day, no money on me, and it was only 1 p.m. I sat at a bus stop and started crying. Luckily for me, my friend was on a bus and saw me, and I went home with her. By 8 p.m., I was picked up by the same dumb agent who took me to a friend's place. She now insisted I stay with her, but I felt so disgusted by her not listening to me. Furthermore, when the previous day she had insisted that I stay with family that didn't like me, I refused her help. The next day, the agency sent me an email telling me that because I had seriously threatened my host family and refused the agent's help, I was being kicked out of the program, that they were canceling my visa right that moment, and that I had to leave the country immediately. And that's how I ended up left in the streets of the US, only with $100 on me, no visa, which is really bad here in the US, and no ticket to go home. One of my newly made friends heard my story and told her mom, who immediately took me to some lawyers. They kept asking me what I had done to make them so angry and so upset and hate me so much. And I kept saying I hadn't done anything, which is still true. They tried to negotiate that they let me back in the program, but they said they couldn't. They reviewed the contract and whatnot, but there was no way around it. I finally called them and told them that I would go to my own country's embassy and complain that I had been smuggled into the US, that they were making me an illegal and putting me in danger. So the least they could do was get me a flight, especially since I had just worked there for 3 weeks and there was no way I could have known they were going to kick me out like that, and I obviously had no savings. I had spent most of them paying to enroll in this program. They at least agreed on buying me a flight back home. This all happened in the span of 3 days. From the moment my host mom asked me to leave to the moment when I actually left the country, I only stayed in the program for 3 weeks before I was expelled. A few days after I left, one of the girls I used to hang out with told me that the family had just received a new 18-year-old nanny. They were trying hard to convince her of how dangerous the city was and make her feel like she owed them something by buying her a laptop and allowing her to bring friends and stuff like that. So my friend asked my former host mom why she had kicked me out like that, and the answer was simply because she was going out too much and I was afraid of the sports that she used to practice. So basically, she wanted me out for going out during my own free time rather than staying locked in my room, and because of martial arts. Months later, I spoke to the guy that picked me up when I arrived, and he told me that the family found out he had been talking with me that night, so they called his boss and had punished him for talking to me. I always wonder if that lady will keep saying just how everything is out there to kill you, and if her kids will grow up and get sick of that and not listen to her. Will she then try to reason with a teenager? Which is just as hard as reasoning with a 2-year-old. I feel bad for those kids because life doesn't say yes all the time. She was 44 years old, very successful, and worked from home. Her husband was making loads of money. If she wanted her kids to grow up with such a peculiar education, where they were never told no, she should have raised them herself and not brought people from other cultures to try to do so. All that these kids really wanted was their mom. Thanks for reading. For reference, this story took place around 6 years ago. At the time, I was an 18-year-old girl with a lot of home problems. I had been dating my boyfriend for almost 2 years around this point. He was Austrian and I was American. Due to our long-distance relationship, we decided that once I turned 18, we would start our gap year of traveling and working weird jobs in between. Since I was in a super toxic environment, I decided to go to Europe for an indefinite amount of time. I got a job as an au pair in Rome, and my boyfriend and I moved down to Italy to live there for 2 months. This story takes place in Rome, shortly after settling into my new family's home. I left their house to meet up with my boyfriend. Since I had just gotten there, I didn't even worry about my cell phone, so figuring I could rely on public Wi-Fi, I didn't purchase a SIM card right away. Bad decision. The location that we were meeting at was around a 25-minute walk away from where I was living, and since the public transport was not reliable, I decided I could walk the way with a downloaded map of Rome. I anyway wanted to see Rome in the night and how it lights up and becomes literally abandoned. Coming from New York, I was not used to a major city actually becoming quite quiet and resting for the night. I was starting to get a little sketched out after 10 minutes or so, walking through empty old streets. Following the map, I was led to a strangely shaped pyramid building, and walking behind it, I was slowly gaining the sense that I was no longer walking alone. I started to speed walk to at least be on the sidewalk of a street, and not behind a dark building with no lights. When I reached the sidewalk, I had that terrible feeling that comes over you when you know you're in actual danger. I turned around to find a 50-something-year-old man walking around 20 feet behind me. I quickly started to pick up walking to a fast pace, and when I turned around again, he had already cut the distance in half and was sprinting to me. The look on his face was pure rage and anger. At this point, I start booking it and running as fast as I can. Hearing the footsteps behind me sprinting is still a haunting feeling to this day. I ran ahead to a busy street and ran across to the other side. Out of breath and crying, I stood watching the man across the street try to cross, but But fortunately for me, the light turned green and the cars were flowing and he couldn't cross. He began to scream and just have an utter meltdown. He was outraged. I fled at this point, running as fast as I could to a bridge nearby, where thankfully my boyfriend was at. Since I took so long to get to the meeting point, he began to ride his bike to come and meet me. I hopped on the bike seat while he stood up and pedaled, and we got out of there quick. I don't know what his intentions were, and I'm glad I never found out. So to every person out there, avoid all the faults and mistakes I did. Never leave without a charged working phone. Try to avoid dark areas and unpopulated areas. And the moment you feel like something isn't right, it probably isn't. This event took place not too long ago. It happened on a Wednesday night when my best friend and I decided to go clubbing. Neither of us are actually club people, but it was free for ladies and a local rock band was performing. They're pretty famous around here, so we figured why not. It's been a while since we've gone out at night anyway. Nothing particularly interesting happened at the club as it was heavily overpopulated. When the show was over, we decided to leave, as it started getting even more populated with new people coming in. It was hard to keep up a conversation because we literally had to scream over each other and, in the worst cases, even push to get past the crowd. We walked around the old town and chit-chatted a bit. The old town was fairly quiet, except for the ambulance trying to aid a drunk guy who hit his head on the pavement. After a while, we both decided to go home. I had to get a taxi because it's quite a long 1-hour trip at least, and there was no way I was going to walk this path alone, as it tends to get quite dangerous at night. She lived closer to the city center and in another direction, so she decided to walk home instead. After I'd ordered my taxi, we parted ways. I had to wait 10 minutes at least, so I decided to sit down on a bench near the bus stop. That's where it began. I was scanning the area, and when I glanced over to the bus stop on the other side of the road, I noticed a dark grayish SUV parked right next to it. Right as I looked towards it, he started waving for me to come closer. I was confused and looked around again to see if there were more people around. When I glanced again, he tried to pull the same gesture, but I didn't respond like before. That's when he slowly started to drive. A bad gut feeling instantly kicked in, and then he pulled up right next to me as I feared. He rolled his window down and yelled, "I'm Ricardo." I'm not even sure if that was his real name. The guy seemed to be way older than me, at least twice my age. He appeared to be in his late 30s or early 40s and seemed to be either Puerto Rican or Colombian. Now, I know sometimes people tend to pick others up if their destination is on their radar, but I had a strong gut feeling that he had other things on his mind. When I told him I was waiting for a taxi, he kept insisting that I should cancel it and get in his car. He also called me baby a few times, and the red flags kicked in even more, of course. He asked for my name, and I blurted out a random name that popped in my head at the time. He took out his hand and wanted to shake hands. I stood up slowly, but something told me not to do it. That's when I got a small peek into his car. I'm pretty sure there appeared to be some ropes or wires on the back seat. There was also a silver light slightly shining from the back, which I assumed to be duct tape. I immediately froze and told him that I'd rather not get too close with strangers, and he tried to reassure me that he was a good guy and wouldn't hurt me. He started getting frustrated, and for some reason he thought that if he would say things like, "But you are so beautiful," at least twice, I would cool down and get in his car. No. He seemed to get angry, but as it took place in the city center and there were quite a few cars and other people around, he just asked me if I was sure for the last time, as if he hoped I changed my mind to his offers that he had made. I blew him off for the last time, and that's when he finally left. He didn't even say bye or anything, he just drove off like the wind. That's when I realized that he must have been waiting in that spot where I'd first noticed him. I didn't see any cars passing by while I was sitting at the bus stop. It's also the exact spot where most people would go after a night out to order a taxi or perhaps go to McDonald's. Whatever floats their boat. The club is located just southeast of the bus stop. A lot of girls were wasted that night, so he most likely wanted to take advantage of that too. When the taxi finally arrived, I texted my best friend. I froze when she texted me that a creepy kind of large SUV had stopped and mumbled something to her. She ignored him and kept on walking. Apparently, he attempted to follow her and kept shouting something, but since she had her earphones on, she couldn't really make up what he was saying. When she ran in between the houses, he was gone. Luckily, she got home safely and so did I. The moral of the story is to always be aware of your surroundings and listen to your gut feeling. I like to think that it wasn't half as bad as some stories I've read here on Reddit, that we handled the situation well, but something tells me that would have been different if we were in a more private and secluded area, So, Ricardo, let's not meet again. Edit. Forgot to include some details. He offered to take me home if I was cool with having drinks with him. When I declined and told him I was tired and would much rather sleep, he kept on insisting that we should at least go for a coffee then. Yeah, right. I've tried Googling him for a background check, but so far nothing. We are currently considering going to the police to spread the word because he could be a potential danger. When I was in middle school about 10 years ago, I had an encounter with a classmate. He had saved me and my brother from bullies a few times and had quite the reputation of sending people to the hospital because of fights. One day, he had caught me when I was walking home. I was for some reason walking ahead of my brother and friends, and he said he wanted to talk about rumors I was supposedly spreading. He said if I tried to run, he would screw me up. Asked me if I liked video games and told me to tell my brother and friends he was going to give me a game for the Nintendo 64. To add a little bit, I was carrying a French horn in a heavily loaded backpack. We got to the house, which supposedly belonged to his friend, and he told me to climb into the boat as he started climbing over a gate to look for his friend. Looking back, he was checking if anybody was home so we would be undisturbed. The boat I was told to wait in was sort of a small houseboat and it had a small deck, and I was told to wait in the cabin. He told me he wanted me to perform fellatio on him, otherwise he would stab me. I called his bluff and told him no. I refused. He kept asking me if I wanted to be stabbed and failed to provide a knife. Then changed it to beating me up, and I told him I was used to it. I got bullied on an almost daily basis. Eventually, his threats changed to making me walk home stark naked if I refused, and I simply said no, I will not take anything off. He then asked me if I had any money, and I lied to him. I would be stabbed. I had only about 7 cents and pulled it out and showed him. There were a few moments of silence and more threats. I started getting a migraine and started crying because I wanted to go home. What felt like an eternity in captivity only turned out to be less than 45 minutes, and I escaped unscathed, untouched, and just incredibly shaken. I ran down the street, carrying my backpack and French horn. There were police officers all over the place, and when I got to my friend's house, which was about halfway home, his older cousin, who was trying to get into the department as an officer, tried to talk to a few of them, but they were quote-unquote busy with another investigation and didn't want to help. Fast forward a year, after my incident, and another friend of mine whom he had mugged a few days before, he had spent some time in juvenile hall and came back, and I believe he assaulted 4 kids ranging from 11 to 14. Jose Avina, the name that will forever be etched into my mind. He was given 4 life terms at the age of 14 for his crimes. It was shocking when I found out after a year. I felt like I had really dodged a bullet and have ever since tried to live my life to its fullest. So, when I was younger, around 13 or 14, I was invited to go on a camping trip with my best friend Pat, his dad, and his uncles. It was this kind of guys' weekend coming of age thing. Something I like to do with my kids now. You know, fishing, cooking over fires, our first couple of beers, sleeping in tents, and stuff like that. We drove pretty far up north, but this many years later, being 30, I can't remember where exactly we went. I know it was about 2 hours north of where I live now. We had packed Pat's dad's truck off the side of the road in a bush and canoed a pretty far distance down a river to a lake and set up our camp at the edge of the water. Right across the water, we could see this really old abandoned looking cabin. On the outside it looked abandoned, the roof was sagging and all the bushes were growing up around it. At one point, Pat's dad and his uncles were fishing and drinking and allowed us to go adventuring a bit. Surprisingly, they actually allowed us to take one of the canoes across the water to check out the abandoned cabin. In hindsight, I don't think I would let my boys now go that far where I couldn't get to them in an emergency, but they were drunk, lol. So being 13-year-old boys, we did exactly that. We paddled across and checked it out. On the outside, this thing looked super decrepit. The front door was unlocked and we went inside. This was a mistake. On the inside, it was certainly not abandoned and was very lived in. It really freaked us out knowing somebody lived there but was obviously nowhere nearby. There were porn magazines spread across the table, a bong, a tray full of weed, beer bottles everywhere, and on one of the shelves in the living room were 2 hunting shotguns. I know it was dumb to play with them, but we did. Never pulled the trigger, obviously, just walked around the house with them like idiots, feeling cool. We checked out different rooms in the house, but one really creeped us out. Yes, I understand we technically committed a break and enter, or a trespass, but we honestly thought it was abandoned before we got inside. Once we were in, we figured it was somebody's hangout or something, but it was pretty deep out in the woods. Anyways, one of the rooms had one of those mannequins that you see in a clothing store, but none of them were wearing any clothes, and they all had wigs of different lengths and colors. Something felt really weird about that, and we decided we'd had enough and left after putting the guns back where we found them. After canoeing back to our campsite, we told Pat's dad everything. He was almost as stunned as we were. That evening we fished some more, and Pat caught a fish that his dad cooked over the fire. While we were eating dinner, two guys came by in a motorboat and stopped at our site. They were friendly enough, and we all joked around a bit, and we had assumed they were just other campers or people out fishing, people like us. But then they invited us to their cabin just across the water to hang out. Pat's dad politely declined, and then they still lingered around, and things just started to feel weird. The two guys were drinking quite a lot and exchanging weird looks. At one point, they even asked Pat and me if just the two of us would go hang out. Pat's dad gave them a stern no, and things were even more awkward then. They stayed a while until it got dark and then they left. That night, Pat's dad and uncle stayed up all night by the fire while we were to sleep in the tent. We didn't do much sleeping, mostly just talking about how creeped out we were by those two guys that lived in that cabin and their wigs, porn, and guns. Eventually, we did fall asleep though. In the morning, everything was packed up and Pat's dad cut the trip short. We put the tent we were in away and left immediately. Most of the trip was spent talking about how his dad was really freaked out about those guys. Pat and I have talked about it here and there over the years, but years ago we had a major falling out. I never did exactly ask where that cabin was. I wouldn't want to go back there anyways. To the wig-wearing hermits in the cabin, please let's not meet again. Firstly, thanks for listening. This has been driving me crazy. Tell me what to do. So this all started about a month and a half ago-ish. I'm an adult in school. On the first day of school, a guy sits down by me. No problem. Don't think much of it. I say hello and go on with my learning. Over time we talk more. Sometimes have lunch and do friend things. Well, over time he got real possessive and only wanted to hang out with me and me alone. It started out only slightly concerning, but as it got worse, so did the concern. One day we decided to get a beer after school, and on the drive there I just had this bad feeling, but went anyways because of stupidity. We get there, park, and we start walking. He can tell I'm not thrilled to be there, and he gets upset or mad. This makes my spidey senses go off like crazy, so I make something up and just literally nope out. I make up an excuse and jog to my car and go. Well, he apparently jogged after me because he opens the passenger door and tries to talk me into getting out and going with him. I say no. He closes the door and walks away. I stupidly think that's the end of it. I leave the parking garage and start down the street. There he is following me. He follows me past a few lights, and when we go to a red one, he gets out of his car and bangs on my window and yells at me to answer the phone. I had been ignoring several of his calls since I started driving. He gets back in his car and keeps following me a while and trying to call. After a few minutes, he goes in a different direction. I later find out he only stopped following me because he ran out of gas. I book it home and call my boyfriend freaked out. For context, he knew I was in a relationship and never tried to hide that. I get a million more calls and texts and don't respond to them. The next day at school, he follows me everywhere. He tries to get me alone any chance he can and keeps trying to sit by me or talk to me. Eventually I get mad and tell him to leave me alone in front of people. He gets mad and goes. After this, some fellow classmates report him to HR and he gets his little slap on the wrist, and I'm told to just not talk to him, but still see him and be in the same room as him all day. Fine, I'll try. That goes on uncomfortably for about a week and a half, and he keeps messaging me asking to apologize. I figure I've got a few more months in class with him. Fine, apologize and leave me alone. We meet outside in front of people at lunch, and he tells me he's sorry but doesn't understand why I won't talk to him or be his friend anymore. Really, he just doesn't get it. He thinks I overreacted and we should be friends again. No. About a day and a half after that, the HR clerk calls me in and tells me she noticed I regained contact with him again. Since I did, I would now be responsible for his inappropriate behavior, and if he made any other students uncomfortable, I would be kicked out alongside him. Excuse me, what? I didn't know what to say and just left. I let the anger build up for about 2 days before I wrote a long, angry email to her. It's been over a week and still haven't heard back. Hope she came to her senses and never speaks to me again. After all that, I've been avoiding him and his gaze every day. Have to make sure we're never the last two in the classroom. Still get texts from him. Can I borrow $5 or want to have lunch together? I miss you, etc. So now I avoid him every day and don't trust the school at all. I don't know what to do about it really aside from avoiding him. We have a class barbecue tonight and he's going, of course. I felt so uneasy since I've woken up this morning. My spidey sense is going off like crazy about tonight. Update. The day after the barbecue, which went okay, he just glared at me all night, so not ideal but could have been worse. Much worse news. The HR emailed me back and it was not at all what I expected. She was going for full on. We had no idea you were being harassed. Why didn't you let us know? Denial. None of it has gone as expected and now I've pushed to lows I didn't know were possible. I don't care anymore. Just don't. Whatever happens, happens. I want to respond to your email in greater depth, but more urgently, I am confused by the allegations of harassment, and this needs to be addressed beforehand. This is the first time you've made an accusation of harassment, and I'm concerned. Our original investigation and subsequent discussions were triggered by concerns from another student regarding a disruptive situation impacting their learning and safety. So that was the perspective that drove our initial investigations, conversations with you and other students, and remedy. After we met for the second time, I understand that you had a follow-on discussion with blank regarding your unhappiness and the perceived unfairness of the remedy we imposed, and the possible consequences explained to you. At neither meeting did you make claims of harassment. If you wish to register a complaint of harassment, please report it to me or here, right away. The matter will be investigated. If it is determined that you are being harassed, immediate action will be taken place. Harassment of any kind is not permitted here. I got a kick out of that, because harassment not permitted, huh? Already was and was completely passed by. This took place when I worked at a local Walmart about 5 or 6 years ago. I was 21 at the time and had already been working at Walmart for more than a year, so I had my share of experiences with questionable and sometimes pretty scary customers, but there was one customer who burned into my memory that I will never forget and who probably changed my life forever. It was a weekday, so it was fairly slow. I was working alone in the girls' clothing department and focusing on tidying up my area, like folding clothes, organizing hangers by size, etc. It had only been about 30 minutes into my shift when a gentleman began passing by me and started to slow down. I saw in my peripheral vision that he was looking my direction, so I looked over expecting him to have a question. What I instead got was him saying, through a painfully wide grin, was, "Hey baby," followed by a kiss blown in my direction. I furrowed my brow and pursed my lips in confusion, unsure of whether he was just trying to be funny or was truly that alpha at wooing women. He made his kissy face for what was probably a full minute, and while I studied him awkwardly, I couldn't help but realize that his sense of style seemed to be very heavily influenced by that guy Pauly D from Jersey Shore. Same kind of hairstyle, clothing style, and stuff. It was actually kind of amusing. After blowing his puckered kisses, he moved along and I continued my work. For the next hour, I saw him pass by in the same direction many more times. At least 6 or 7 that I could count when I was actually paying attention. And the first 2 times he did the same thing, calling me baby and blowing his kisses. It started to get obnoxious after the 3rd time, so I moved further into my department and faced the opposite direction when I saw him passing. He responded by changing his path and was now walking directly through the neighboring clothing sections and was slowly getting closer and closer with each passing, as if he were circling in like a shark around my figurative boat. The longer he circled, the more my gut clenched. Eventually, he directly approached me. He reached out and lightly caressed my hair from behind me and held it in his fingers for a couple of seconds. I had very long hair, so he wasn't right up on my face with his hands or anything, but still ew. I turned around to see him holding my hair, and I took it back into my hands wide-eyed. "You have beautiful hair. You're so beautiful," he said. "Thank you." I didn't want to snap due to fear of getting myself in trouble, and plus since I was deeper into my department, there weren't exactly a lot of people around that could see me anymore, so I didn't want to set him off like I had an attitude. I started to slightly shake with mild anxiety and felt my face get hot as my blood pressure rose. My gut was screaming at me that something was seriously wrong with this dude. Again, he carried on walking without another word, and he winked and blew another kiss. It was then that I realized that the cart he had with him only had 2 items in it, so he had been circling my area for more than an hour and most likely wasn't even really shopping for general merchandise or food anyway. I decided that this was a good opportunity to take a break and ran off to hide in the break room for the usual 15 minutes I was given. While I was in there, I saw my coworker and good friend, let's call him Chris, come in and told him briefly about what was going on. Mainly just that a guy had been circling around and calling me baby, but that was all I could squeeze in before I had to go back to my post. He expressed that he found it creepy and told me that he was due to clock out in a couple of hours, so he would check on me on his way out to see if the guy lets up. 2 hours seemed like more than enough time to get him to leave, right? I mean, maybe he was already gone since I was in my department for those 15 minutes anyway. Well, I didn't necessarily see him. I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting him to come from behind me. I even kept my hair over my shoulder in front of me so it wasn't flowing down my back anymore, and I became more and more paranoid as it started to sink in that this complete stranger just made physical contact with me in a way that I wasn't comfortable with, and I wasn't sure if he would do it again or do worse. The unknown was frightening. I kept working in this anxious state as I made my way over to the girls' jean shelves and began removing wadded piles of jeans to fold. That's when I saw him again. He was behind the shelves, watching me from there for who knows how long. I mean, an hour and a half is a long time for not physically seeing him, but realizing he never actually left the store, like I'd hoped, was enough to make me queasy. When I saw him, I let out a short gasp, dropped the jeans, and backed up with my hands to my chest. He gave a shit-eating grin with a sly chuckle. He walks around the shelf and asks, "Did I scare you?" Yeah, in fact, you did. I heard the fear in my voice this time, and I'm certain he did too. He apologized, but he didn't leave, instead asking me questions he had no business asking. I gave every single one a vague or sarcastic answer. Time to get off of work. Not soon enough. Where do you live? Not around here. Do you like to hang out anywhere after work? Anywhere that's with my boyfriend. How long have you been with your boyfriend? A long time. Eventually, he realized I wasn't giving him the desired information he wanted, so he moved along once more, but this time saying he would be back later. I took out my phone to check the time after this, and that's when everything dawned on me. How much worse this was than I initially thought. He had been there for almost 3.5 hours. Not only was this dedication scary enough, but what was worse was I was only working a half day, meaning my shift was over in less than an hour, and I was truly and utterly afraid that he was going to follow me to my car, or worse, home. As I looked at my phone in horror, almost as if I had physically called him, Chris came by after clocking out as he promised. My face was bright red, and I felt as though I was going to have a panic attack. I told Chris that the man was still here and he was getting worse. I also told him everything as fast and quietly as I could, in case the poly wannabe came back before I could finish. Chris, I don't know what to do. He still circled me like a shark and was watching me from behind the shelves. He was asking me a bunch of questions I didn't want to answer, and he's wondering what time I'm off work. He freaking touched me and caressed my hair. I don't know what to do. I have 30 minutes left on my shift, and I don't know what this guy is capable of or what he's planning. I don't even know the guy's name. I'm scared, and I just don't know what to do. Chris asked me which way the guy went so we could see him for a description, and I told him that if he waited a few minutes, he would come back on his own. So he did, and he tried to distract me with a normal conversation and calm me down. About 5 minutes in, here he comes. I told Chris to act normal and let him know that the guy was coming up on my right. We kept holding our conversation as Chris casually glanced over. I held a fake smile for a moment as though our conversation were going ever so well, and I looked over with my eyes. Polly wannabe was glaring at Chris, daggers that could cut thin air locked in his direction, turning his head as he passed by. Chris played dumb as though he didn't notice and said out loud that he was going to grab his stuff and turned to head back toward the back room, despite the fact that he was on his way out the door. After Chris left, my creepy admirer came right back up to me as though he were waiting for that, bumping me lightly with his cart, asking if that was my boyfriend. I told him that he wasn't, although I probably should have lied, now that I think about it. He began asking if I could get him a job there. What? And started asking me more questions about what I usually do, what departments I work in. Again, I gave vague answers, not that it would do much good because no matter where exactly I am at work, I am still somewhere in the building and could be found rather easily. As he's holding the Q&A, I see 2 managers, a man and a woman walking into my department as Chris passes by, giving me a reassuring nod that Polly wannabe didn't see. The managers just stood there watching us. I looked over at them with the cry for help in my eyes, and they inched closer. The creeper took notice and turned to me, silent for a moment. "Am I getting you in trouble?" The last words I spoke to him were, "It's not me that's about to be in trouble." The jig was up. He left his cart that still had the same 2 items in it and power walked out of the store. The managers came to me and asked if he was bothering me, and I told them everything. The shark circling and watching from behind the shelves, the uncomfortable questions, the hair touching, all of it. And topped it off with the fact that it went on for what was now almost 4 hours. They told me they would check the cameras and see if they could get a good shot of his face so security could keep a record of the incident in case he returned. Also to see if he bothered anybody else. They then asked one of the other managers to walk me to my car after my shift and to wait until I pulled out of the lot before returning indoors to make sure I wasn't obviously being followed. I made it home safely and without issues, but the fear still lingered. I could never return to work without the paranoia again. I worked there for a little more than another year, and he never ended up coming back that I saw anyway, but I never forgot him. I kept constantly looking over my shoulder when I worked alone and feared that he would return. And any time that fear began to disperse, I had nightmares that would remind me of him. Those nightmares came and went up until about 2 years ago. Even though I know the situation wasn't as bad as it could have been, my overthinking and anxiety kept repeating what if and making me think about what he could have possibly had planned had he succeeded at sticking around until I left for the day. It affected my ability to go anywhere in public alone, even to this day. After the nightmares finally stopped, however, I was in for a surprise. I may not have been overthinking things as much as I thought, that my gut feelings were correct. His mugshot showed up on my newsfeed in July of 2017. The local sheriff's office was looking for him and found him shortly after. He was wanted for stalking, apparently going to businesses and picking out women to hang around. Watch and harass was a hobby of his, exposing himself to women, masturbating in front of a store, where he was watching women work through the window, grabbing a woman's breast, and grabbing a woman between the legs. He pleaded no contest to these charges. As I looked at his mugshot in disbelief, I took the opportunity, now having his name, to look into his criminal history. One of the most recent charges I just listed, he had been arrested for many counts of different types of battery on people on many different ages, one being older than 65. And at least one included him being armed. But the charge that hit me the hardest was that about a year before my encounter with him, he was charged with kidnapping. Whether or not something of that nature was what he had planned for me, I will never know. But I'm glad I didn't have to find out. I consider myself very fortunate that I didn't have it as bad as the other poor souls he was able to get his hands on, thanks to Chris and the managers that watched over me. Why this man was able to walk free for so long despite his consistent disgusting actions is a mystery. I don't know what his sentencing was last July, but if the justice system lets him roam once more, all I can say is I hope we never meet again. Some of you may or may not remember my crazy neighbor who has been terrorizing everybody. He is currently spending a lovely stay in the local jail, awaiting arraignment. One neighborhood family had a 4th of July party Saturday the 5th. It was a low-key barbecue, and at some point one of the kids there invited some other kids back to his place to play Wii. A bit later, the crazy neighbor shows up at the barbecue. He corners one of the moms and basically says he will kill her kid if he's ever on his property again. Somebody else overhears, and pretty soon the crazy neighbor is surrounded by understandably upset people who just heard a death threat against their kids. Apparently, the crazy neighbor starts talking back and saying he just meant for them to stay off his property and that he has a right to defend himself. When the crowd started getting angry, he ran off. Cops were called and corralled by their parents. According to the kids, they were walking by the crazy neighbor's house when a car came around the curve. There's no sidewalk, so they stood off to one side of the road. Then the neighbor came out yelling at them. The cop went to his house, and the next thing somebody sees is the crazy neighbor in the back of the cop car. Nothing happens around here Saturday night or Sunday, so the neighbor isn't going anywhere until Monday at the earliest. No clue yet what the charges were. The whole neighborhood is abuzz. Edit. Apparently, he will be serving another weekend in jail and had a fine, plus he has to take some sort of class now. Also, are there some other charges from non-neighborhood issues? Not sure if that was his interaction with the cops or what. Details are sketchy. The police blotter just said he was arrested after making threats and resisting arrest, so everything I am hearing is word of mouth. My story isn't that spectacularly scary, but it was extremely creepy and very real, so here it goes. About 2 months ago, I had gone to McDonald's at around 7:30 a.m. to buy a barbecue breakfast burger. Can't remember the burger's name, but it was before I started class. The McDonald's is in a mall, so the seating is just one large food court. Anyways, I'm usually very shy and introverted, so I wanted to find a quiet spot around the edge of the food court to eat my burger. I find a seat, and there are only 2 middle-aged ladies sitting to one side of me, and this one man around his 50s, maybe 60s, obese, sitting to the other side eating a tin of sardines. I sit down, put my bag on my lap, and start eating it. During the consumption of my very unhealthy yet delicious burger, the old man begins mumbling things to himself. It's very faint, and I don't take much notice of it, as he appeared to be a man who had a bit of going on upstairs, if you know what I mean. Quickly, his mumbling becomes slightly louder and clearer, and at this point I can fully understand what he's saying. He's talking about murdering people, saying he'll slit someone's throat, and mentioning it wouldn't be hard to track somebody down and kill them and their entire family. He went on with these threats for a while. The list of these threats was more extensive, but it was a while ago and I can't remember much. I'm thinking at the time he's on the phone with somebody, so I'm more skittish than scared. I expertly take a glance at him by pretending to be alerted by someone's tray hitting the table, and then turning my head toward the man. I look at him and there he is. No phone in sight, staring directly at me with the dirtiest, most malevolent look. Now I'm scared. Being very shy, I will try to avoid aggressive or violent confrontations with anyone really, so I finish my burger, but I stay seated drinking my water because I've still got to wait over an hour to go to school. And he continues with the mumbling threats. I am stupidly shy like I said, but I know when enough is enough. Is this old guy seriously talking about slitting my mother's throat? Or mine? I begin to work up the courage to say something to him. I'm thinking something along the lines of, "What did you just say to me?" I also have the non-emergency police number ready to use it as a threat. I delay it as long as possible, and finally he finishes his canned sardines. He gets up to throw the cans away, and when he goes back to his seat, he packs up his bag, readying to leave. I'm pretty freaking relieved. At this point, I'm thinking, well, I can't believe I got scared. This guy clearly has a few mental problems. To note, he's still mumbling the death threats, which I've come to the conclusion he's not directing them at me personally. They're just a general thing, as he's definitely messed up psychologically. But it's not over yet. As he's standing up and packing up his bag to go, he looks at me and I look at him, and he says, "I'll see you very soon, boy," and walks off. So, that's my personal let's not meet again story. Not absolutely horrifying, but it's the truth. Since that morning, I have not seen him again, nor has my family been brutally slain, yet, and hopefully never. Hello everyone, my name is Luke and I'm French. I'm 26 years old and I have currently lived in Australia, Brisbane since May 2019. I met my girlfriend Mina, who is of Japanese origin, 1 month after my arrival in Australia on a strawberry farm where we both work. We worked over there for several months until the health crisis hit the planet, so no more work on the farm, we have to do something else. At that time we had 2 choices, go back home and split up or stick together and try to get through this event on our own. Spoiler, we chose the second solution. We then decided to leave our seasonal job in the countryside to go into town trying to find a new job. Bingo. Good news for me. An employer has agreed to hire me to work on a local Australian football team. This employer will be named Kathy. Kathy explains to me that I can work for the football team, but that currently, because of the health crisis, a containment will be mandatory even if at this time Australia is rather spared compared to Europe. Anyway, I am hired, but I'm going to have to wait until the lockdown passes and the football season resumes. So, I explained that it tempts me, but that it will be tense for Mina and me to remain unemployed during the confinement because we have to pay rent and food, etc. You should know that Kathy has a heart as big as Australia. Sensitive to our situation, she explains that she has a solution for us. She has a holiday home several kilometers from Brisbane that belonged to her father, who is now in a retirement home where we could stay for free for while confinement is in progress. At this time, I don't believe it too much. I tell myself there is something fishy in front of the situation. I agree. This is the best solution for us. We accepted this and moved to the house a few days later. Animal Crossing, Splatoon, and MK. We enjoy playing video games during this lockdown. Everything is going fine. We feel a little bit lonely because this house is isolated in the countryside, but apart from that, we are well. We have a garden. All this for free. I also point out that this house is like in the middle of nowhere. I just have a neighbor, John, who takes care of horses I've been friends with, and that's it. Other details that will have their importance. In this house, there is a main entrance door with a large fuzzy glass so you can distinguish things through it. And there is another wooden door behind the house that overlooks a veranda connected to the house. This house is a single story, so there are no floors, and to finish, no curtains at the window except in the bedroom. The context is given, the story begins now. 3 or 4 weeks after I moved in, Kathy calls me with good news. I can go to work. First day of work, everything goes smoothly. I like what I do and it's a very good atmosphere. The only problem is, we're still in Kathy's father's house, which is several miles from Brisbane, and I don't have a car, so I have an hour and a few trains to go and the same one to come back. But like I said before, I have nothing to complain about. For the record, Mina was still looking for work. She wasn't as lucky as I was, so she was mostly at home while I was working. Second day of work, always at the top. 5 p.m., I'm about to finish my job when I get a call from Mina. She whispers, the voice trembling, and you have to know that we communicate in English, both. And we are not necessarily bilingual, so sometimes we understand each other half. The first second I feel something's wrong. Here, I will switch from her point of view to give you a maximum of detail. She was quietly playing Animal Crossing on the couch when suddenly she saw a silhouette through the blurred window of the main entrance door. Too small and too wide for me or John, and she understands it very quickly. She stares at this figure that is now motionless facing the front door. It is at this moment when she tries to get up gently, walk away from the door, that this guy begins to frantically knock. Her heart is racing and she doesn't know what to do. She tries to be as discreet as possible so this guy thinks no one is there or will open it to him. She finally decides to hide in the wardrobe of the room because it's the only room where we cannot see what is happening from the outside. Snuggling between the hangers and our clothes and praying for him to let go, she suddenly remembers that there is a second door behind the house that is open and she doesn't know if it's locked or not. Being courageous, she decides to rush through the house to reach this door, and then during her run, she sees this guy sneaking past one of the windows of the kitchen. He goes around to check if there is a door at the back of the house. Panicked, but already in her race, she decides to go to the end and try everything. She must close this door before he tries to open it. It is finally when she presses the latch that she hears the individual trying to push the door. Completely frightened, she goes back to hiding in this wardrobe, and that's when she calls me. As I said earlier, I struggled a little bit to understand what she was saying to me on the phone. Her voice trembled, etc., but I immediately tried to calm her down so that I could have clear information about what was going on. After a minute or so, I asked her to focus on her breathing and listen to me, and she calmly describes to me what just happened. I switch my modes. I have to go home as soon as possible while making sure that she is in the least amount of danger. I ask to stay in the closet and call the police and call me back right away until I get home. She decided to stay on the phone with me, which is not the best solution, I admit. She should have called the police, but I was in a state of total stress, and the fact of her having on the phone continuously reassured me. I ordered an Uber, who must have found me super weird. Besides, I kept asking him to go faster, even to pay more. After a few minutes, I am in my Uber, always with Mina on the phone. She explains to me that she can't hear anything anymore, like no one knocking on the door or no one around the house. I don't advise to her anymore, but finally she motivates herself to take a look out the wardrobe. To finally, a few minutes later, confirm to me that the silhouette is no longer visible behind the door, that nobody seems to be around the house. I'm in front of my house. I go to meet Mina and give her a big hug by explaining that I'm here. She has nothing to fear. 6 p.m. It's night at this time of year in Australia. I check the locks and try to pass the ideas of playing a game and watching anime. Big mistake. In my relief, to rush to find it without problem, I have omitted a detail of the greatest importance. Check around the house. Damn, Luke. Why not check around the house? It's time for bed. 1 a.m. The neighbor's horses wake me up. I hear the hoofs. Mina, still not really asleep, asks me what the noise is, and I answer that it's the neighbor's horses. 3 a.m. Loud booming sounds. Somebody knocks frantically at the door, but like super strong, like he's halfway to breaking down the door. I can tell you that I discovered what adrenaline was at that time. I'm sure it's the same guy, and he's been trying to get into the house all along. Mina screams. I start to tremble everywhere. I have this feeling of being paralyzed but still having so much energy to spend. It's very strange. I get up from bed in order to barricade the back door and then call the police. It is at the moment when I leave the room that I hear a deaf and metallic noise. Damn, he opened the back door. He's on the porch. So there is only one last door with a poor wooden hold under the small space at the bottom of the door that separates us, and he's still determined to come inside. For me at this moment, it is sure he will enter. I'm not much of a fighter, but not the choice. I get the biggest knife I have. I place myself at an angle so that I have the best chance of catching him by surprise when he enters, and I'm willing to use that knife to defend us, to defend Mina, who is paralyzed in bed. I'm scared, but at the same time I have confidence. It's really, really strange. When suddenly, in the midst of her millions of thoughts, Mina screams, "Stop! Call the police." I look at her and she throws my phone at me, and I think that instead of waiting without doing anything, maximizing my chances of staying safe while waiting for her behind the door, it's a good idea. So always in the same position, ready to defend myself, I call the police. The phone call must have lasted 40 seconds. The policeman on the phone understood directly that it was serious. He asked me the address, and that they were on their way. At this moment, I find myself a little bit more relieved while staying on the lookout. This is where the individual starts mumbling incomprehensible stuff, which does not reassure me because of the noise that it makes. I tell myself that it is either a drunk or drugged guy or a mental patient. He must have figured out I called the police, but he's still touching the handle and pushing the door. I've never been happier to see flashing lights. The cops are here. 4 police officers and 1 police dog. When I see them approaching the house, I hear noises behind the door. The individual seems to get scared and gives up. I hear the dog barking, the policeman screaming, and a man moaning. It was over. The individual neutralizes and gets into the car. One of the police officers remained to talk to us and take our side of the story and find out whether we wanted to file a complaint or not. He told us that there was a chance that this man was a rehab patient who'd run away. He also told us that he wasn't sure of anything at the time and that they would have to verify his identity, but we never heard from the police. There you go. Australia is a great place. I'm kidding. Despite that, we have wonderful moments here, and nothing similar happened then. It's already way too long, so I'm done here. Hoping that this moment of intense life captivated you. Peace. Okay, so before I delve into my own creepy story, I want to acknowledge that there were many times throughout the following encounters that I acted very stupidly and unsafely. So before anyone comments on how dumb I was, I know that as I type this, I have the South Park Joseph Smith Dumb 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 song going through my head. When I was 19 years old, like most people my age, I was attending university and was living in a private house off campus with a few other students. As I'm not the most sociable person and didn't go out very often, my daily routine was pretty consistent. Wake up early, morning lectures, lunch at home, evening lectures, and then home for the night. The campus was around a 15-minute walk from the house, which I made alone as my flatmates were based on different campuses. One day, I was walking to university with my earphones in when I noticed a red car crawling along beside me. The driver was male, around 5'9", quite muscular with a few noticeable tattoos. He was staring right at me, and so I pulled out my headphones to hear what he was saying. He asked me some general questions like name and what I study, and then for my telephone number because he'd like us to go on a date. I wasn't interested at all, but I'm one of those people that have a hard time saying no, so I gave it to him but changed the last digit thinking I wouldn't see him again. Even though he claimed to go to the same university, it's pretty big. And he probably asks a lot of women out, so he wouldn't be too fussed. I then hurried off and forgot all about it by the end of the day. A couple of weeks later, I was walking to university again when I spotted the red car turning the corner on the opposite side of the road. Feeling a little bit embarrassed, I avoided eye contact and walked a little bit faster, only to hear the sound of tires screeching on the road behind me as it made a sudden U-turn. Now on my side of the road, the red car zooms past me and comes grinding to a halt a few meters ahead. The guy gets out and rushes towards me. I'm shocked, but continue walking until he blocks my path and begins shouting in my face. Why haven't you been answering your phone? I told you I want to take you out. I've been calling you every day for weeks and you haven't been answering. He wasn't much taller than me, but it felt like he was towering over me, really close and very angry. I decided that telling him I wasn't interested wouldn't be the best thing to do as he was so upset, so I said I had been busy, that I had finals, and had switched off my phone to focus on my work. He calmed down instantly and his whole demeanor changed. It was almost a Jekyll and Hyde transition. He then said, "It makes sense that you're busy. I've seen you walking to campus every day. You are in the library every evening now, and you shouldn't work so hard." The only new addition to my routine was nights spent in the library. It didn't seem weird at the time because he had told me he goes to my university, so I shrugged it off. He then claimed to be going to class too and asked if he could drop me off. For somebody who reads extensively about serial killers, in particular Bundy, you would think I would have known better than to get into a car with a stranger, but he wasn't even offering candy, so I'm officially dumber than a 5-year-old. I rationalized that the campus was 15 minutes away through fairly busy streets, which I knew well, and that he had calmed down now, so I got in the car. Almost immediately, I felt it was a huge mistake. For the first few moments, we were silent until I couldn't stand the awkwardness any longer. I asked him what he studied and what year he was in, to which he gave very vague short answers, so I figured he didn't want to talk and fell silent again. Then it started. "I'm sorry I got so angry. I just really like you. When I spoke to you, it made me like you more, and I noticed you have really clean fingernails. Not like some of those whores with painted nails you see. I hate girls like that," he said. "Oh, and do you speak another language? I like it when girls speak to me in another language when we're having sex," he said. I laughed most of this off as I didn't know what to say and noticed we were approaching a street next to my campus gate. At this point, I was thoroughly freaked out and just wanted to get to the closest, safest place I could find. He thankfully pulled over and let me out, insisting on walking me to the door because his next lecture was about to start and was a few doors away. I slipped into the nearest room I could find, pretending it was my next class, after saying my goodbyes. Inside the room, I waited a few minutes hoping he'd be gone, and he was. However, when I started walking to my actual class, I noticed he was leaving the campus. After this encounter, I decided to change my walking route, which successfully meant I didn't see him again. One evening, I noticed I had a mass email from my course organizer warning all students, especially female, to be vigilant, as an assault had been reported the night before in an area close by. A description was eventually released of the perpetrator, which sounded very eerily similar to the man in the red car, mostly due to the similarity between the tattoos described in the report and the ones I have seen up close. I don't know if he was caught, but I never saw the guy ever again. About 4 years ago, I lived in a college town while my husband attended the university there. I had 2 small daughters, a 2-year-old and a 6-month-old, and we loved the city. It was super family friendly and had a ton of great places for me to spend time with my kids. One of these great places was a public library. The children's section was secluded from the rest of the building, so the kids were free to run and play without disturbing anyone. There were toys and puppet shows, a huge train set, and an awesome princess castle. My kids loved it, so we hung out there at least twice a week. One morning, I loaded my kiddos up and headed to the library. My 2-year-old was playing with the castle, her favorite, while I held the 6-month-old a few feet away. A woman approached me, gushing about how cute my baby was. I was pretty used to this. My daughter was a stunning baby after all. Big brown eyes, dark ringlets, and the chubbiest cheeks ever. People always came up to me cooing at her. But this woman was different. My mommy senses started going off, and I got a pit in my stomach, and I was immediately put on edge. She stood way too close to me and was touching my baby girl way too much. She was even pinching her cheeks and rubbing her head, grabbing her little hands and kissing her, inching closer and closer, all the while. She kept saying, "Oh, I just love babies. She's so pretty and I love her," in this sort of manic sing-song voice. I kept trying to put a little distance between us, but she wouldn't have it, always inching closer. Then she started asking to hold her, and I immediately made excuses. "Well, she's pretty tired, and we need to go soon. She's really attached to me and she'll just cry." Looking back, I wish I had just told her to leave us alone, but I was nervous and didn't know what she was trying to do, so I defaulted to politeness. After a moment or two, my baby dropped her binky onto the floor, and the woman stopped down to grab it for me. But instead of just handing it to me, she put it in her own mouth, supposedly to clean it off, then tried to pop it back into my daughter's mouth. I snatched it and told her I needed to go. She said, "Oh please, let me hold the baby before you go." I obviously told her no and started trying to get my older daughter's attention so we could leave. The woman then said, "Oh, I just love babies, I can't help it," and grabbed my daughter from my arms. She then started inching away from me. By this point, I was petrified and furious. I firmly said, "Give me my child back," lunged for her and grabbed my baby bag. I had to practically push her away from me. She started scooting closer again as soon as the baby was out of her arms. I grabbed my older girl and hightailed it out of the building, hoping to escape as fast as I could. As I approached my car, I realized that the woman had followed us to the parking lot. She was still gushing. "Oh, you have two beautiful babies." I felt sick to my stomach. I realized that while I was buckling the baby into a car seat, my 2-year-old would be standing next to me, where this crazy woman could potentially try and grab her. Sure enough, she was inching closer and closer to us every second. I was certain at that point that she was going to try and steal one of my kids. I was shaking and close to tears, but my adrenaline kicked in and I was somehow able to pick up both kids and buckle them safely in the car without letting go of them. As I was pulling away, I watched the woman in my rearview mirror. She just stood there in the parking lot watching my car until we were out of sight. I didn't go back to the library for a long time after that. This will be a bit short, but completely true. I grew up in a small town in British Columbia, Canada, around 7,000 people with my mom. The town I grew up in is a small area above the border and is heavily wooded on the outskirts of the city. We lived in my grandma's house until my mom could afford to get her own place around the age of 7. I remember one night the phone rang. I answered and said hello, to which I didn't hear anything, so I hung up. Then another ring. This time when I answered it, I could hear creepy giggling on the other end, which creeped the heck out of me. I gave the phone to my mom and she told me to go downstairs. Every so often, a few years, this would happen. The giggling and random calls with nobody on the other end, and I would usually forget about it. By the time I was 10, we had moved to a few different places in town, and I can't remember if it happened or not for a while, so I'm assuming it didn't. One night I was watching TV before bed and the phone rang. I answered to someone on the other end, saying my name in a weird whisper, and ran crying to my mom. She answered, and I can remember her saying, "Okay, you need to stop this." I can't quite remember what happened after. All I can remember is going to sleep. That night, I woke up to tapping out my window. I remember being too scared to move. Through the small crack, my window was open. I heard the whisper again saying my name. "Maddie." I freaked the heck out. I took a few seconds, which felt like hours, to muster up the strength to run to my mom. She said I was having a bad dream, until she checked out my room and immediately called the police. The police showed up and caught a man hiding in the thick trees lining the yard. My mom had to have a big talk with me and explain that this man is my biological father and is mentally disturbed. The call stopped for a few years, but have happened since, only a handful of times. I'm now 18, and honestly, they don't disturb me as much as they used to. To my creepy biological dad, I will beat your ass if you come near me. I have both loved and been creeped the heck out while reading these stories. I have a couple that I would like to share. First, let me say that my mama was a mama bear. Probably a bit overprotective, but as we were entering the era of Adam Walsh, who could blame her? She kept a close eye on me and my sister. She was so protective that I found myself shrinking whenever there was a moment that I should have used my voice. My mom was my voice. This will come into play later. This particular Sunday, I was about 8 years old. Come to think of it, this was before Adam Walsh, around 1978. We drove to Shreveport to pick up my nanny, Grandma, and take her to lunch. We only lived an hour away and usually did this once a month. Our routine included lunch at Piccadilly and the mall and then shopping or looking around. My favorite store was Hallmark, not for the cards ironically. I loved to look at the trinkets, journals, and ornaments. My mom knew this and so allowed me and my sister to go in. She and my nanny would sit on a bench right outside the store where she could look in at us through the glass. I had just walked in and was admiring the ornaments halfway back in the store when I heard, "Excuse me," behind me. I turned to see a boy, maybe 10 to 12 years old, standing behind me. "Hi, may I ask you a question?" he said. I remember even at my young age that the boy was very well spoken, almost like a salesman. His accent was not from the South. It sounded Midwestern or possibly Northern. The boy in general would not have been strange except when I looked at his face. He had a black eye and lacerations on his cheek covered with a band-aid. This boy had been beat up severely. He must have seen my shocked expression as he immediately said, "Yeah, I'm sorry about my face. It was an accident." He then quickly goes on to ask if I could help him find a card for someone's birthday for him or something to that effect. I remember turning around and looking outside of the bench toward my mom. She was in a conversation with my nanny. My sister had already left Hallmark and was sitting beside Nanny. I willed my mom to make eye contact and come be my voice. Nope, she was focused on her conversation. Sigh. I turned back around and meekly said, I don't know. He must have noticed the look in the direction of my mom and my hesitation as he said, It's okay, you're safe. My mom is right back there. He points to a woman with her back towards us, looking at cards, pacing a bit. The cards I'm looking at are right back here with her. Come on, it's okay. Come on. In retrospect, I can hear the desperation in his voice. I took 2 steps towards him, and when I did, I noticed that the woman was standing next to a door. I had that gut fear almost about everything back then, but in this moment, my stomach was in my mouth. I remember wondering where that door led. Every hair on my head stood on end. He would take a step back and say, Come on, it's okay, really. Almost like I was a puppy he was trying to wrinkle. I was only 8 years old, but there was more than desperation in his voice now. There was fear. Something wasn't right. We were about 8 steps from his mom now. I immediately turned toward the mall exit and threw out a very frightened, I've got to check with my mom. I remember the with my mom part. I was already out of the mall and headed towards her arms. I was in her lap in 10 seconds. She asked if I was okay and I just said, yeah, that boy was trying to talk to me. Both turned to look and the boy was looking out through the glass at us. As soon as he noticed my mom looking, he pretended to turn and look at cards. My mom just said, okay, you're alright, and turned back to my nanny in conversation. It was true. I was okay then. I think she just thought I was being shy and scared, which was usually the case. I saw the boy go back and talk to the woman or his mom. She did not look happy. I could just see fear coming off of him. She sent him back out into the store and turned back towards the cards, still standing near the door. In my adult brain, I realized that she was off, just like the boy. She was pretending to look at cards. She would occasionally glance back at the boy. I saw him go up to a couple of more people and talk. I can't remember if these people were kids or not. This could have simply been a situation where she was trying to get her son to open up and approach others in conversation. But everything in my gut tells me that she was using that boy as bait to abduct other kids. And had I gone back there with him, they would have tried to usher me out through that door into a waiting car. Then maybe I would have been bait in the future. I never told my mom about the entire incident. I knew her. She would have said, honey, you should have said this to him or you should have come and gotten me. I was already ashamed that I would chicken out in moments like that. I wonder often what happened to that boy. I can still see his face. Dark eyes, olive skin, dark hair. Clothes slightly disheveled. I remember looking on the news to see if there were any abductions, but I also remember his accent. He was not from our Texas or Louisiana area. He could have been taken from anywhere. There were no Amber Alerts back then. A little beat up boy in Hallmark. I remember you. I wish I had used my voice to possibly save you. I'm sorry I was too scared. I hope you are safe. In respect for my best friend, whose life was a mess as a child, I've been keeping this story inside for a very long time. I'm going to be completely honest, I've never even spoken a word to my mother. At first, it was fear of getting social services involved. Then, after they got involved anyway, I guess too long had passed and I just figured she never really would benefit any from knowing. This all happened when we were 11 years old. I'm 29 now. It all sort of feels like a surreal dream. This feels like the appropriate place to get it out. Names changed, of course. When I was in elementary school in Canada, that's K through 6, I was an awkward child. I have high-functioning autism, and while my grades were great, my social functioning was lackluster. Still is, if I'm honest. This left me with a fairly small, very colorful group of friends. 2 of the closest are Jesse and Katie. I came from a fairly overprotective household. My mom watched me like a hawk, and thus I was a naive kid. I didn't really understand that a lot of the oddness and dysfunction that would come out of my 2 friends had to do with problems at home. We were never allowed at Katie's house. I think her mom was extremely overweight to the point of hardly being able to move, and she was embarrassed of it. Jessie's house, however, was only a few blocks away from the school. We ended up there a lot. Her parents were divorced, and her mom was deaf and mute. My mom and her would communicate through notes, and I would go over while she at first would always seem slightly erratic. There were no real red flags. When we first started going there, Jesse's mom was living with her boyfriend as well as her boyfriend's parents. Everybody in the household was deaf with the exception of Jesse and her younger brother, but both of them had limited hearing. I think for the first year or so we were there, the boyfriend's parents kind of kept everything from getting too out of hand, but it was pretty clear it was a dysfunctional household. After they moved out of the house, it was just Jesse's mom and her boyfriend. They would often lock us in the basement and I would spend the night. It was a full apartment, so we saw it as fun freedom. But the one time they forgot to lock it, we walked in on them doing something under the table with needles. Again, we were too young to understand, but we did understand that we walked into something bad. From this point on, we would be designated to spend our sleepover nights in her garage as it was furnished with carpets and couches. The issue with this was Jesse's mom always kept the door locked so we wouldn't interfere with her activities again. So when one of us had to use the washroom, you would have to knock on the basement window until Jesse's little brother would hear and let us in through the basement window to pee. Another issue being, he was hearing impaired. Thus, sometimes it would take a literal hour of absolute banging on that window. We were young, and this felt as close to freedom as you could get. We didn't really understand why or that it was wrong or dangerous for Jesse's mom to do this, and I never told my mom. It kept going on. One night, we were doing our normal sleepover playing Pokemon Gold, trading and battling with link cables, and waiting for Jesse's mom to bring out the oven pizza that she said she was cooking us hours ago. It was about midnight. No bedtime in that house, and Katie said she really had to pee. She was trying to wait for Jesse's mom to bring in the pizza so she could go through the door, but she couldn't hold it. She goes out by herself to try and rouse Jesse's little brother Aaron. We were expecting it to take her a little while, but to our surprise, she comes back extremely quick, locking the garage door behind her and latching the lift door. She looks really startled. She tells us that she was knocking to try to get Aaron's attention when she hears a rustle from the bush next to the gate going to the front yard. It takes her a minute to realize what she's looking at, but standing about 5 feet from the gate, 15 feet from the window Katie is at, is a tall man dressed completely in black. She said it seemed like he just appeared out of the darkness, or like he was waiting for something. He asked her if she's managed to lock herself out while slowly taking a step towards the gate. As she gets up and takes a step back, his pace quickens towards her and she sprints back to the garage. At first, we thought she was just shifting with us. We laughed and told her to stop messing around. Then we heard it. Hard twisting of the locked doorknob. Then worse. The sound of scratching metal against the knob. He was trying to pick the lock. We stood in absolute fear for a moment, then grabbed the only pathetic things around we could use to try to defend ourselves. Then it just abruptly stopped. There were no windows in her garage and no peephole on the door. We couldn't see what was going on. We waited for about 10 minutes, having no idea where the man was, if he was still out there, where her mom was, or where that freaking pizza had gotten to. But we were like sitting ducks in there. He had clearly failed to pick the lock, but who knows if he would try or what he would try next. Now this is stupid, but we were stupid freaking scared children. We grabbed our weapons, which consisted of glorified sticks, and we left that garage. At first, there was no sign of the man. We moved towards the downstairs window and started slamming on it, screaming and pleading for Aaron to open it. Again, that's when we heard it. It was an almost sing-song, mocking voice that rang out. Well, hello again. 3 men, all in black. The one in the middle had spoken. They made a move forward. We once again sprinted back to the garage. This time, they just straight tried to kick in the door, all 3 of them stomping and kicking. It was close to giving in, and then everything stopped. Jesse's mom had come out the back door, pizza in hand, and startled them. She ran back inside and got her boyfriend and his 2 other friends. Users travel in packs, and they were able to chase them off with some actual weapons. I'm guessing we were still inside the garage. We could honestly just hear it. The adults stayed in the backyard all night, weapons in hand. One person even sat on the roof with a compound bow. Night turned to morning and it all settled down. We never stayed at Jesse's house for sleepovers after that. She was put into the care of her grandparents shortly after. It took me a really long time to actually grasp what happened that night, but considering they never called the police, I'm fairly sure we almost got literally murdered over some drug debt Jesse's mom had. Literally can't imagine the evils that could have gone on that night if fate wasn't on my side. Something tells me those 3 men were way too happy to find children to take as penance, and it would hardly have just been a straightforward murder. Still makes me shudder. I don't post too often, but I've been reading through all of these posts, and it sparked an encounter I had years ago on a solo bike tour. It was the spring after I graduated college, 22 female, and didn't know what I wanted to do with my life, so I decided to take a pause and ride my bike down the coast from Canada to Mexico. I was pretty nervous to be going by myself, but for the majority of the time, I felt safe. Halfway through or so, I got pretty comfortable with sleeping alone in fairly empty campsites, parks, etc. There were even some stretches on the trip where I rode with other bike tourists. This one encounter, however, brought my guard back up for the remainder. I was halfway down the Oregon coast and was a mile or so from the campground I had planned to stay in for the night. There was this notable yellow vintage Ferrari, car that had passed me in the opposite direction. When I pulled into the campground, I stopped at the information board to look at the map and fees. As I'm sitting there, I see the yellow car coming down the road and stopping where I am. This older guy in his late 50s or early 60s gets out and starts looking at the board with me. He's friendly and seems completely normal, charismatic even. He's asking me about my trip and starts mentioning how he's from the area but has never checked out this campground. At this point, I'm still pretty naive, and there are plenty of nice people I've met on the trip that chat me up and ask about the bike tour. He's talking to me and getting closer, and this is the part that starts making me uneasy. He would repeatedly reach out his hand to shake mine like he was about to leave, but every time he shook my hand, he would grab my forearm with his other hand and do this weird gasp laugh thing. The way he did it looked insane, and the arm grasp was very firm. It sent shivers down my spine. Then he drives into another topic and repeats this freaky handshake maybe 2 more times in between. I realize that I'm completely out of sight from anyone in the campground, have no phone service, and I'm now very close to him and his open car door. There's a knot in my stomach. I'm on the verge of tears, and my voice is shaking with every response. At this time, I didn't even know why, but something felt very off about him. I finally speak up loud, hoping somebody can hear me, and tell him I gotta get going, run to my bike, and speed to the campground. When I get there, I don't even try to find the hike and bike spots and just throw the tent down directly across from the camp host. Again, I had a lot of encounters with random strangers at this point, but none of them terrified me like this one. I fought with the idea that he was probably just an overly friendly guy, but the fact he would repeatedly grab my arm and laugh was frightening. All in all, most people I met were very sweet, and it made me very trusting of others. Even if he were harmless, his actions were a good reminder that I had to be mindful of my vulnerable situation and be more alert. I used to order a lot of pizza. I love pizza. Well, my local pizza place got a new driver who way overstepped the boundaries of what is acceptable. He tried to force his way into my home to share dinner with me, and just general creepy behavior. So I stopped ordering pizza. Well, really, I never noticed anything. I have a security system, so I figured all is well, and I never check it really. About 2 months after the pizza incident, I hear scratching at the side of my home. I figure it's animals. I live outside the city, so there are animals usually looking for a place to nest. There was a big fresh coating of snow. So I do what I usually do and let my dog out. He is a huge 120-pound King Shepherd ex-Maremma, and he just bolts out of the door. Again, not unlike him when there's an animal outside. But around 20 seconds later, I hear screaming and swearing, then screaming in pain and terror. You scream for my dog to come back, he does. He is a good boy, and I call the police. Well, they do a search of the outside of the house. What they find is blood, lots of it, and pry marks at the side of it. We go through the footage, and sure enough, there's a person who is trying to force open the window. The dog charges him and tears up his ass and leg pretty bad until I call him back. He gets up and limps off my property. Well, at the front of my property, the entrance to my drive, I have a camera. It's well hidden. I get the guy going to his car and his plate. The cops take it and go to the hospital. There was a lot of blood and the person would need medical attention. Well, the guy said, "Oh, I was trying to surprise my girlfriend and I fell. Man, I am a widow. I never plan on dating again for the rest of my life." But they come back to my house, tell me this and show me a picture. Surely enough, it was the pizza guy. They found rope, duct tape, a camera, and a knife in his car. So, take that shit seriously. This happened last night. I worked late at our retail shop. We close at 5 p.m. except for 6 weeks during the summer when there are street dances from 7 to 9 right out in front of our place. We are one of the sponsors and we give 2 $25 gift certificates as prizes for each of the weeks. Since many folks who attend are on vacation here, I like to stay open during the street dance. If somebody wins, they can walk 50 feet over to spend their prize, even if it's the last night of their trip. Plus the music is cool. They always have a good band. So after closing and doing the books, I got home about 10 o'clock. Normal. It's just my wife and me plus the dog and 4 cats. We tend to go to bed and get up early. It's a rural area. We have neighbors, but we're on a quiet lake and it was all quiet and dark by the time I rolled in. The wife and I often sleep in separate rooms because she has trouble getting to sleep and I do not at all. I trained myself to go to sleep fast decades ago and it has stayed with me. I can often get to sleep in 2 or 3 minutes. And I snore. We both do, but I definitely take the laurels for volume. I have woken myself up with loud snoring more than a few times. So I was unsurprised and unbothered to see a note asking me to sleep in one of the spare bedrooms when I entered the dark and quiet house. Our main bedroom is in the finished basement and she was there. So I settled into the place I usually choose in the upper level. It's a double bed in a small bedroom that also hosts my laptop, the dog's feeding station, and a water fountain for all pets. I like the flowing water sound. I recently washed this set of bedding and reinstalled the back on this bed instead of changing it out for another set. Just part of normal household chores, but I know I'm the one who handled it the last several times in a row. It's pretty fresh. It has been used 3 nights since then. About 4 a.m. or so, my best estimate, I woke up feeling something odd and blocky on the edge of my bed nearest the wall away from me. And it wasn't just doing something loose. It was a hard squared off lump underneath the sheet. Not very small. Bigger than my hand, just a little. A really weird thing to feel at that time in that place. I told myself it was a weird dream and went back to sleep. I woke up at my normal time of 6 feeling a bit groggy. I fell over to the side of the bed where the blocky object had been. Still there. I pulled at the sheet and was able to remove it. It was a piece of 2x4, 6 or 7 inches long. Odd as heck. Convinced I was clearly still dreaming, I rolled over and went back to sleep. I woke up at about 6:30 feeling a bit closer to normal. Got up, had coffee and breakfast, did chores, tended critters and plants and headed off to the shop. Got in this evening about 6. Watched Prey on Hulu with the wife. Agreed to sleep in the same places, ate dinner, did normal evening at home stuff, came into the room and began getting ready for bed. Sitting on the cedar chest across from the bed is a 6 to 7 inch piece of 2x4. We haven't had any chunks of 2x4 sitting around this place in 6 years since I finished out the basement. I burned all the leftovers in our fire pit by the lake years ago. There have been no visitors and there is no lumber stored here, period, scrap or otherwise. I'm stumped as to how this piece of wood appeared where and when it did. It's enough out of place as to have me thinking I dreamt it when encountering it first. I don't have any known enemies, and it's not like waking up to a horse's head in the bed. What's the message to a piece of wood? Yet, I am a bit creeped out at how it could have got to be where it is. Are the trees sending me messages? What the heck? Anyone? Edit. I posted this last night just before going to sleep for the night. This morning I looked and the wood was still there. Though it looks more like 4 to 5 inches long, so my sleepy brain overestimated the original length I stated. I experienced something else mildly odd. The desk light was on when I woke up. This was at 4, earlier than I wanted to be up, so I rolled over and went to sleep again until 6. It's never turned itself on before, but has a touch sensor for power and light levels, so maybe it flaked last night. Odd and annoying. Light woke me, so I'm pretty sure it came on right before I woke and noticed it. I have it turned so the digital clock face on it doesn't shine towards the bed because even that is too much light for me to enjoy trying to sleep through. I read the post on the vanishing lumber. Sounds like as good an idea as any. Though, if things are going to appear in my vicinity via tiny wormholes, or whatever that means, maybe let's do money next. It appears to be a very normal piece of wood, 2x4, unmarred, no tooth marks, etc. For clarity, the chunk of wood was found underneath the fitted sheet in the bed. The fitted sheet was otherwise in place as expected. The layers of material in the bed are frame, box spring, mattress, mattress cover, fitted sheet, flat sheet, and comforter. There are also 5 pillows. I have acid reflux and extra pillows help reduce nighttime incidents. Also, I like one under my knees for an achy back. The dog is an elderly and small Sheltie. She doesn't really do toys. The wife and I are her toys. She herds us. She can barely jump up on that bed, but I have seen her get up there on her own. I have put her up, but as soon as I stop petting her, she's down. She was stray before we adopted her, and I suspect a former male presence in her life was really critical of her being on furniture. She doesn't really get on it much. The cats, well, one of them plays with toys a lot, including tennis balls, but I can't see him picking up the wood chunk and getting it into the bed, much less under a fitted sheet without removing the sheet from the bed on at least one corner. I have no other Reddit accounts for the person suspicious as such, and if you look at my post history, it should be obvious I'm real and far from perfect. I tend to think such things are worth an occasional peek if you believe somebody may be less than honest. When I sleep in this bedroom, I shut the door. This is primarily because one of our cats has a tendency to come get me at about 5 a.m. every morning if I don't. And get me, he will. It is an emergency. There is less than 1/3 of the food left in his bowl. How could I be sleeping through such a crisis? I must arise and correct this life-ending emergency this instant. So yes, I shut the door. Our windows that are open are casement windows that crank outwards. They are by default proof against casual entry when closed. Locking them does make them more secure, but you have to break the mechanism to get into one that is closed. It's a 100-plus-year-old lake cabin too. The windows that don't open are plate glass. Nobody that looks at my should-have-been repainted last year residence is under the impression I have a bunch of art or money in here. I asked my wife. She cackled about the giving wood comments. Guess that was the clue. I'm still puzzled by this all. I'm sorry if this is long and reads like a fever dream. This happened on my 19th birthday. I was living in Vermont on a mountain away from home as a working student on a massive horse breeding farm. It was February and obviously very snowy. We left a multi-day out-of-state event in the evening to head back to the farm. I was driving my own car, a sporty old coupe, but front-wheel drive, with new sales rep as a passenger. We are both women and she was maybe 25. The other working students were riding with the boss in the big rig or with another who was driving her van. We convoyed with everyone else until about 12 a.m. when the trailer had an issue near Albany, New York. We had encountered snowfall all night as there was a blizzard going on, but it was now getting bad around this time/area. The boss told me and the sales rep to keep going so that we could make it back for morning chores in case they didn't. The barn manager was the only one who stayed back at the farm. We knew she slept like a sloth on tranquilizer and she was expecting to have the day off since we would all be back. Everybody else stayed so that there was enough hands to unload the horses if needed. The rest of the trip, around 3 a.m., the sales rep and I reached the back roads to get up the mountain to the farm. At this point, there was about 4 inches of snow on the roads. We kept having trouble getting up hills and tried every route we could think of. I didn't have a lot of gas left and we were tired and getting nervous. The sales rep suggested another route she thought she knew and I figured why not. I had never been this way because I would simply drive the same way down the mountain to go to town on my day off. We got pretty far with this other road, but snow was still falling and I was having trouble with the hill again. At this time we saw a house, extremely far and few between, in that area, and I was able to pull into the bottom of the driveway. It looked like they had a truck up there and there was a light in the window, so we decided that we should knock and ask them if they could drive us to the farm. I know this sounds totally nuts, but everybody knew of the farm and the boss had been there forever and seemed to know everyone personally. Plus, we were together, so we figured it would be okay, and it would hopefully be a nice man who knew our boss. Of course, this is where it gets weird. We are walking up, and suddenly a dog starts viciously barking and lunging at the end of a very short, heavy chain that is attached to a tree in a blizzard at night. This startled the heck out of us, and obviously we didn't like it on an ethical level even, but the house was only a few yards away now, so we sprinted to it. We get to the door, and right as the sales rep is about to knock, I grab her hand now because that we're close up and not chatting or dealing with a scary dog. I notice the door is only a piece of plywood on hinges and the little house is a crappy looking shack. Basically like they built their own permanent shelter but didn't have the skills to do it nicely. Meanwhile, the dog is still barking and lunging on the chain. She sees what I see and we decide to back away and then end up running to the car because it was just one of those redneck properties that you imagine wouldn't appreciate visitors. It snapped us back into our senses that there could be multiple men inside or something dangerous, so especially considering the dog situation. I managed to drive up that hill that was giving me trouble before, and as we get going, we see a herd of mini horses run across the road in a line and jump into the woods. We had a good idea. Maybe not the best, considering what just happened, that if we found a farm along this road, it could be their horses and they'd be grateful for our help, catching them and driving us home. Not long after, we came to a well-kept little farm, and the road was a dead end right after. The sun was starting to come up now. We leave the car on the road and walk up to the house, which isn't set far back at all. We knock endlessly and nobody answers. Just as we started to walk back to the car, the sales rep spotted something running up the road. It's the dog. We ran like heck to the car and got in just in time for the dog to jump around the outside of it, biting the mirrors and whatever it could get a hold of like he was deranged. To be clear, I love dogs. We lived with the manager's pit bull, and I've now been working with dogs in many settings, including shelters, for years. I have had bites and have worked with court-declared dangerous dogs. I have never seen one in person as aggressive as this before or since. We got the heck out of there, and I drove as fast as I safely could away from the dog. We didn't see anything else on the road or glancing down the driveway of that shack driving past it again. When we got stuck on the next hill, we simply parked at the end of another driveway and sat there. My gas light was on and we were using the battery to run the heat. We were completely delirious, just laughing and crying while keeping on the lookout for the dog or a crazy man. Eventually, around 6:30 a.m., we saw a plow truck coming and got to flag it down. He knew our boss and gladly plowed our way home. I really do believe someone sicked the dog on us because the chain was so heavy and we were almost a mile up the road when it got to us. We also had been watching the mirrors as we left the shack because we were so freaked out already. Whether they thought they were going to break in or were just mad that somebody came up to the driveway, we'll never know. I'm just glad it was an almost creepy encounter with whoever lived in the mountain shack. This is an oddly disgusting story. Last week, I had to catch the bus to and from work as my car was in the shop. On Thursday night, it was about 8:30 when I got to the bus stop. Sitting there was a lady in her mid-20s sitting in the shelter, and a guy, likely early 30s, sitting on a couple of steps behind the bus stop shelter. I stood against the wall waiting for my bus. It was the second bus scheduled to stop there. As I waited, I noticed the guy look up at the woman whenever she would look down at her phone, like he was nervous she would see him. The woman had a bottle of water next to her. As the first bus approached, she dropped the bottle of water in the bin. In the bottle was probably a mouthful of water at the bottom. As I watched her sit down and the bus drive away, I noticed the guy got up and was looking in the bin after 5 or so minutes. He reached his arm into the bin and pulled out the bottle of water. He then ran over to a car parked across the road but south of the bus stop. I could see in his car as it was facing towards the bus shelter. I couldn't help but wonder what he was doing with the bottle. I would look up slightly every so often, and on the fourth time, I could see in the light of his car. I saw he was sniffing the water in the bottle, and then the part that made me feel ill, he licked the rim of the bottle, replaced the lid, and placed it on the seat next to him. As he drove past, we locked eyes, and he looked as if he had hit the jackpot. I felt sick in the bottom of my gut, as if I had just witnessed a crime, but with no real victim. I never saw either of them again. Okay, so this is long, but there's a lot of info. So, my mom is newly widowed, October, and had been with my dad for 48 years. She still looks great, is classy, and has always been faithful to my dad, and because of this, has always had a line of guys interested in her, including this one. I'll call him Todd. Todd has known her and my dad for years through a local watering hole they all went to. Not together, and they were friendly from there. He finds out my dad had passed away recently, so a month ago, Todd started showing up to my mom's work. She works at a local store as a cake decorator. He initially comes in and talks to her, which isn't out of the ordinary. She has many customers who come talk to her regularly, but this time Todd says some things that let us know he has been looking for info about her online. He first says, "You're 65. And she says, "Yeah," kind of confused why he's saying that. He then says, "You were born on such and such date." And she says, "Yeah," still confused. Then he says her phone number. From then on, he began contacting her a lot. She didn't think much of it at first, but even those are major red flags in my opinion. Todd starts coming to her work more regularly, calling and saying, not asking to come over too. She would say no, but he would still show up and be super pushy about things. When he would show up, she would let him in but say, "Fine, but you can only stay a half hour," etc. He would come in. They would talk and sometimes have a drink, and she would tell him it's time to leave. This continues for a few weeks, and then I come home to visit. My mom hadn't even told me about him before this, and then she comes home from work one day and is noticeably worked up. She said she has a friend coming over and it is a guy. I laugh and say, "Mom, it's fine. I know my dad would have been okay with it and wouldn't have wanted her to wait. He would want her to find somebody and be happy." She said they aren't dating or anything, but warns me that the other guy often acts like they are a couple even though they are not. So Todd comes over, and sure enough, he does just that. I'm confused initially, and by the way he is acting, it seems like they have been dating for a few months, and I'm wondering if my mom was just afraid to tell me. She's acting weird, but I can't put my finger on it. She keeps saying in front of him that he acts like they are a couple even though they aren't. He just laughs it off and tries to grab her hand, or put his hand on her leg. Then she goes into another room, and he tells me how nervous he was to meet me. He starts crying, and I think for a moment he is going to ask if it is okay to propose, because he is so serious and going on and on about how much she means to him. He tells me that my mom was sobbing to him, and he hugged her, and that she just sank into him. It was creepy AF. Of course she is going to be sobbing because her husband of 48 years just passed away, and my dad adored her. He also makes some alarming comments, like saying my mom spends too much money. She really doesn't and hasn't had a lot her whole entire life, but she is better off now financially than when my dad was here because of a few different things. My parents only recently, as in within the last 5 years, purchased their first house. He also tells her privately that she is not allowed to go out with my daughter and me that weekend. I find this out later. Needless to say, I'm not feeling good about him, and I'm lost at this point, and fuming because I don't know when this all took place. I also need to add that Todd used to work with my husband. I wouldn't have even known, as I didn't initially recognize the name, but my mom mentioned it to me. So I called to ask him about the guy, not even telling him why at first, and he instantly tells me he is a snake in the grass, untrustworthy, manipulative, and vindictive. He goes on to tell me that the guy was fired for stealing company time, and reminds me that he has told me about him before. About 15 years ago, Todd told my husband at work that Todd would be married to my mom if it wasn't for my dad. I then remember the conversation and how we all laughed and joked about it back then. I'm also very concerned at this point because I realize he had had this obsession with her for over 15 years now. So I don't address it with my mom that night because I want to collect my thoughts and don't want to hurt her feelings. The next day, she has a hair appointment, and Todd had heard her talking about it. I come back from the store and Todd's vehicle is in the drive. I'm not happy at all about it. I go in and he's there talking and standing with her in the kitchen. She tells me right away that he just stopped to see her hair real quick. I find out later he just showed up without calling. He also kept asking questions and seemed a little too interested in our St. Patrick's Day plans that first night. We were going to meet up with my grandpa and go out for a bit, as we are Irish and it is a big deal in our family. I could see he was taking mental notes of what we were saying when we talked about it. So it wasn't surprising when he brought it up the next day at my mom's. I made it a point to barely say anything, and he left a few minutes later. He leaves, and I tell my mom right away that he is not freaking coming with us the next day. She immediately says okay, and that she doesn't even really like him that much anyway, so she's fine with that. It's my relief. Then he knocks at the door again and walks in and says he left his phone here. My mom says he couldn't have left it anywhere but the kitchen because they didn't go anywhere else in the house, but he makes a weird point of saying it must be on the couch when they were in there, and sure enough, it's there. Even though my mom swears they didn't even go in there. They are right next to each other, and he easily could have set it there real quick while talking to her. I almost felt as though he was listening outside, but I can't be sure. So he leaves, and I explained to her what my husband said. My husband was very concerned, mind you. To the point he said we needed to contact her work because Todd would try to get her fired as well as contact the police and let the neighbors know. I am very concerned for her safety at this point. She trusts my husband with her life, so she takes it very seriously and says okay. She goes on to tell me she had only been talking to him for a few weeks and that he kept stopping by even though she would tell him not to. She did kind of like him but wasn't really invested or anything like that, and I think honestly she just liked having somebody to talk to. She tells me that he was going through a divorce, but they hadn't finalized it because he was still on her insurance. I get that, but then he tells her that he just went to a lawyer to finally get it done. She tells him, "Well, I hope that isn't because of me or anything." And he tells her, "Well, I already paid $5,000 to the lawyer." It makes her feel obligated to him. I also find out from my uncle that he had a run-in with him. The very first week they were talking, Todd got my mom some tires for her car. She paid for them, he just picked them up. He drops them off and my uncle is shoveling the snow in her driveway. Todd comes up and doesn't even say hi or ask him who he is, but just says, "How old are you?" in a weird way. My uncle tells him and then explains how he is related. Todd doesn't respond and walks off into the house. When he comes back out, my uncle says, "Thanks again for doing that for her. We really appreciate it." Todd doesn't even acknowledge him and just gives him dirty looks, like he is jealous. I also find out that Todd told my mom some ridiculous story about my dad offering to do drugs with him at the bar, knowing my mom is against that kind of thing and she obviously can't question my dad. It is like he is competitive with my dad, who isn't even here, and it infuriates me that he would badmouth him and say something that I know isn't true. So that brings us to St. Patrick's Day. Todd shows up to her work again and just says, "Give me your keys, I'm gonna wash your car." My mom says, "No, you can't take my car." He has never driven it before. He is just this pushy and presumptuous. She tells him he can't go with him that night and he can't come over anymore and can't call. She goes on to explain that we don't think he is good for her, that my husband is concerned, and that she wholeheartedly trusts him, so that he is to not contact her anymore. She calls me to tell me this, and while I'm on the phone with her, I start hearing somebody pounding on the door. It's him, I find out, but I don't answer. I'm not sure how it was even possible to get there that fast. He knocks for 15 minutes and then leaves a note in the door for me to call him. I don't call but text and tell him I got the note, but don't feel we need to have a phone conversation about anything. I tell him my mom explained the situation already. She doesn't want to see him anymore and he needs to respect that. He responds saying he deserves to know who said what. I tell him that's not necessary and we would have felt the same based on our interaction with him. I failed to mention earlier my daughter was also there when we met and realized she knew him. She was the main bartender for a year at the bar he frequents and she hated him. He constantly tried to tell her how to do her job. When he met her, he tried acting like he didn't know her at first. He pleads with me to speak to him on the phone and I say it's not a back and forth discussion and he needs to respect that. He then goes on and says he thinks it's all BS and that nobody said anything at all. I tell him I will do everything in my power to make sure he stays away at this point, that we have notified his work, neighbors, and the police. He continues to call that night. We have not heard from him directly since then, but he sent a mutual friend to my mom's work to let her know that Todd said he won't bother her anymore, but that if she wanted to call him in a few weeks after everybody settled down, she could. This worries me that he is still holding out hope. It also worries me about what will happen when I leave tomorrow. He knows I am leaving tomorrow as well. This happened a couple of summers ago as my boyfriend and I were driving home along a remote Forest Service road in British Columbia, Canada, returning from a camping trip. We are pretty familiar with the area we were in, having camped there several times before. Typically, the only people we encounter out here, a good 70 kilometers from paved roads, are fellow campers and off-road vehicles or logging truckers on the job. This particular day was beautiful, sunny and warm, mid-June. We were bumping down the road at a good pace when we saw a man come out of the bush and began frantically waving at us. Very odd. We slowed down and came to a stop, with my boyfriend rolling down the window to see what this guy had to say. I was in the passenger seat and as soon as we slowed down, I picked up a weird vibe. He was wearing a blue plaid construction worker's flannel coat, much too heavy for the warm weather, with khaki pants and work boots. He was clean shaven with messy gray-brown hair, pale skin, and large glasses. He was maybe 50. Let me stress how unusual it is to run into somebody way out there without a vehicle. The guy was fairly soft-spoken and calmly, almost robotically told us that his car battery is dead. He asked us for a jump. Okay, sure. We believe in road karma and always want to help people out in trouble when we're in the bush. But where is the car? He tells us that he's been fishing all day and has been playing his radio, and it caused his battery to die. His car is down a very overgrown side road a little further up the main road. He walks ahead while we slowly follow behind him in our truck. Both my boyfriend and I are a bit weirded out, and we joke around with each other as we're following him that we hope he's not luring us in the bush to kill us. Except I legit felt on edge, and the joke didn't seem that funny. We followed him about 150 meters down the overgrown side road into a small heavily treed area, just wide enough for about 4 cars to park side by side. We never would have noticed this road if it hadn't been pointed out to us because bushes had nearly covered the entrance. Anyway, sure enough, there is a car there, an older model, beige Chevy car that looks very unsuited to the rough logging roads. The trunk is open for some reason and a blanket is draped over it. The hood was already popped on the car, so my boyfriend got out, grabbed our jumper cables from the back seat of our truck, and began attaching the cables to the car. Meanwhile, I swung my leg over the center console and slid into the driver's seat. I felt very uneasy and looked around the cab for anything that could be a weapon, all while telling myself I was being silly. But nonetheless, I wanted to be ready to act if something threatening happened. The guy chatted with my boyfriend jovially, telling him about his buddy he was fishing with, but apparently he went on ahead without him. But his friendliness seemed forced. He stood back, allowing my boyfriend to do everything, lingering behind him watching while the boyfriend got the car batteries hooked up. There was an awkward pause and my boyfriend had to prompt the guy to get in his car to crank it over. Throughout this, I sat in the driver's seat watching, feeling tense. The car fired up easily and the guy got back out of his driver's seat. He said thank you in an oddly intense way. My boyfriend removed the cables and hopped onto the passenger seat without bothering to put the cables away properly, and the moment the passenger door closed, I was reversing back down the narrow side road with branches scraping across both sides of our car. We got onto the main road within moments and went on our way. My boyfriend told me that the guy watched us the entire time as I backed down the road. Could have just been a socially awkward guy with a legitimately dead battery, but I can't help but feel this guy's intentions were more sinister, and the fact that I stayed vigilant in the car and that my boyfriend was efficiently competent with the jumper cables helped us dodge a bullet. Not sure if the battery was really dead, but neither of us remember seeing any fishing gear. This happened all the way back in 1998 when I was in grade 7. Our school system required that all students take a semester of woodshop and a semester of home economics every year of middle school. Semesters were 5 months long. In my part of Canada at that time, middle school was grades 7 and 8. Our woodshop teacher was a man in his mid-50s named Mr. P. He had quite a reputation. Older girls warned younger girls every year. If you were female, you never wanted to be stuck alone in his class with him. If you got detention, you begged a classmate to either intentionally get into trouble so you deserved detention together, or begged to have them stay late to work on their project after school. Anything to avoid being alone with him, as the older girls said he would start to say hugely inappropriate and graphically sexual things, and then even start touching. Starting with the girl's hands, arms, then her hair, shoulders, back, and then, well, worse. Much, much worse. It was an open secret. The principal and school board had to have known, but things weren't like how they are now. People didn't listen when kids complained, and the school board was heavily invested in covering for bad or abusive teachers. We were sort of left having to deal with these things on our own, with no support and no adult help. Wendy was a girl in my class. We weren't close friends, as she hung with a different group than I did, but we got on well enough. Reasonably good acquaintances, I guess. One day, Wendy got in trouble for talking in class when Mr. P was trying to go over safety info for a new piece of equipment and was given detention. Her friends were all on the same sports team, which was leaving the school right at the dismissal to go play another school's team, so they couldn't stay with her. Wendy had been given detention by Mr. P once before, for talking when she shouldn't be, so she was petrified at the prospect of being stuck alone after school with Mr. P again, and she went from classmate to classmate for the rest of the day, begging for their help. Everyone had some reason they couldn't stay, so she was getting absolutely desperate and was nearly in tears. Finally, she got to me. I wasn't on the sports team. I was a clumsy, bookish, shy, nerdy kid who avoided sports whenever possible and didn't have anything on after school that day, so I agreed. I would stay and work on the crappy birdhouse project we'd been assigned. Wendy got to Mr. P's classroom before me. I had stopped in my locker in the washroom before going to the shop room. When I got there, Mr. P was already sitting right beside Wendy, and it looked like he was about to stroke her hair. When he saw me, he yanked his hand away as if he'd been burned and stood up, putting space between him and her. He glared at me and demanded to know why I was there. I stammered out that the lie I wanted to work on my birdhouse assignment. In reality, I was further ahead in my project than most of the others were, so instead of grabbing my nearly finished birdhouse from the rack, I grabbed Wendy's and began working on it. For the entire 45-minute detention, he sat at his own desk, silently seething and glaring at me. When Wendy's detention was over, we took off nearly at a run. She thanked me profusely, and that was that. As far as I know, Mr. P has never faced any real consequences for being a creep pervert. I'm absolutely certain that he has sexually assaulted many girls over his long career. What a frickin' creep. A little over a month ago, I had gone to pick up an item from a seller who, for the sake of anonymity, we will call Mike, who lives in Canada. We exchanged a few messages regarding pickup, and he was dead set on meeting just outside his house. He wouldn't budge on it and said word for word. If not specific place here, then I am done here. He seemed to have quite a stubborn and aggressive temper right off the bat, so I was hesitant to even meet him, but the item I was looking for was something that was sold out online everywhere, so the fact I found one for sale for much cheaper than its original price won me over. It turns out my gut instinct was right from the start, because when I went to do the pickup, it got worse. He told me he liked to kill and skin animals for fun. He tried to bribe me into his apartment or walk me back to where I was headed. He was asking where I lived in high detail, and at one point he even tried to put his hands on me, but I took a step back and stood my ground. He was asking a lot of really personal and quite frankly creepy questions, and though I didn't answer them in the ways he probably expected me to, I just tried to act polite and not upset him any further, as in his messages he was saying that he was angry and had a horrible day. Once we went our separate ways, he acted all giddy over the fact that the app supposedly links your phone number to your account, and that would be his way of keeping in touch with me. Needless to say, I blocked his account, as he seems to be a really dodgy and sketchy character. He looked miserable and upset when I said I didn't use social media, which I truthfully don't, but he was desperate to stay in contact with me somehow. Keep in mind, this man looked to be in his late 30s or 40s, slim build, white dude who claimed to have some super attractive wife he met on plentyoffish.com. Yeah, creepy. I was tempted to file a report against him with the police, but because he technically didn't do anything, I found that it would be pointless to do so, and instead I am posting a warning about it here on Reddit. Please stay safe out there. Have somebody tough with you, or really anyone with you, even if it's a group of people. I legitimately feel like this seller is capable of harming another human being, and it's only a matter of time. This happened to me almost 20 years ago, but it still gives me the creeps. I had booked a taxi with a licensed taxi firm, long before the days of Uber, to take me from a friend's house to my home in the early evening. It was dusk as the driver arrived. As I left the house to get into the car, he was coming to the house to get me, and for some reason, as he turned to walk back to his car with me, he briefly touched my shoulder with his hand. It wasn't lingering, but it was deliberate, and my immediate thought was, why is this guy touching my shoulder? My intuition said it wasn't right, but I was in my 20s and this guy must have been in his 50s, and I convinced myself that it was just something people from that generation did. I sat in the back. The journey should have been around 20 minutes from north to south London, and in the first 5 minutes of the journey, there was some initial chat where he told me I was his last job of the day, and he had no plans afterwards. When he told me that, I felt a pang of fear, but I thought, this guy is from a licensed firm. He's been identity checked and approved to do the job. His ID card with his name and photo and registration number was clearly displayed on the dash. He was from a firm my friend used regularly and had an account with, although she had not met this particular driver. My logical brain told me that he's clearly traceable to me if he decides to do anything, so he just wouldn't take that risk. Plus, it was early evening in a very busy area, and that made me feel safer. Also, by this time we were already on the road. I spent the next 15 minutes or so of the journey looking at my phone. I really don't know why. Maybe I was purposely trying to distract myself because I was nervous, but I felt my nerves were very unreasonable. This was the early 2000s, so the phone would have been basic compared to today's standards, but there must have been a game, I'm thinking snakes or Something on it that distracted me because I did not look out the window for some time until I noticed it was mostly dark, and when I did, I expected to be very close to my home. To my horror, I saw we were in some very deserted part of town I had never seen. This area was most certainly not on the way from my friend's house to mine. It should have been a straightforward drive through central London, and this was a very remote area with what looked like an abandoned housing estate and abandoned cars. I looked to the driver to ask where we were, but before I had the chance to say anything, I noticed he was repeatedly looking left and right down the dark alleyways we were going past. And I noticed we were slowing down. I also noticed he was breathing weird, very audibly, like in a sort of pumped, wound up kind of way. And that's when this overwhelming sense of knowing hit me. He was looking for a deserted place to stop. At that point, a very clear voice in my mind told me that he was going to do something very bad and I had to think fast. I blurted out, "I don't know where I am." He didn't say anything. I then said the words to the effect of, "My friend asked me to call her when I was home safe, and I should be home by now, so I need to call her and tell her I'm not home safe, or she will call your firm and call the police because she's over the top like that." That must have jolted him into thinking about the consequences of whatever he was planning to do. These really were the very early days of mobile phones, and not everybody had one of them, especially the older generation. Perhaps it was a lifeline he hadn't considered I might try to use. With that, he turned out of his abandoned area, and we came to a main road, and after a while I saw places I recognized, and we headed towards my home. He said, "Well, I'm sorry if I made you worried, but there was something weird about the way he said it." And that wasn't the end of it. When we got close to my home, I decided I did not want him dropping me off there. I lived with my sister, but she was staying at her boyfriend's house that night, and we lived in a communal block. I was concerned he might be in the main front door and try to get access to my flat. So I said I realized I didn't have milk at home and he could drop me off at the store down the next street. He had to agree to this, obviously. I entered the store and hung around in there for a bit. I remember being completely broke in those days. My friend paid for the ride via her account. I did have milk at home and certainly wasn't going to buy some unnecessarily. So after a few minutes, I left the store and walked the 3 to 4 minute walk back to my flat. As I approached my flat, it was completely dark by now, and the area around my flat was poorly lit. I saw a car parked facing the main door of my flat, and I thought, "Oh man, it's him." And I know he would clearly be able to see I had no milk, as I didn't even have a bag on me, so he would know I was lying. As I passed the car, I couldn't bring myself to turn to look at him, so I got my keys out, quickened my pace, and entered quickly. Once in my flat, I plucked up the courage to look out of the window, and sure enough, it was that guy. He had driven from where he dropped me off to my flat and was sitting in his car staring at my flat. Just then my friend called, and I told her I had just gotten home. She couldn't believe how long it had taken, around an hour when it should have been 20 minutes, and I explained the whole thing. As I was on the phone with her, I looked out the window again, and he had finally gone. I didn't report any of this at the time, and from my safe vantage point of 20 years down the line, I regret it. But at the same time, I still doubted my gut instinct. Even though I had had this strong sense of knowing in the car, after the event, I convinced myself it was fleeting hysteria, and my logical brain returned. My logical brain also told me that if I did report him, nothing could be done because he hadn't actually done anything I could prove, and if he admitted the detour, he could say he took a wrong turn and he would just deny having returned to my flat. But reporting him might cause trouble for him, and he knew where I lived, and that scared me more. I was always cautious around my flat after that, and thankfully never saw him again. I should have reported it. I know nothing would have been done, and I would have probably created a bigger risk to my safety in so doing, but I should have reported it for other people's sake, and I regret it. It was the summer of 2006. I was 16 and I had just gotten my driver's license. I lived in a small suburb in South Georgia. It was a small coastal community that rarely ever had crime. The neighborhood I grew up in did not have a community pool, but the neighborhood next to ours did. My mom's friend lived in the adjacent neighborhood and had given us passes to use whenever. One day, my mom was cleaning and asked me to get my brother out of the house to entertain him. He was only 6 at the time, so I thought we could go to the pool and chill for an hour to help my mom. We get to the pool and there's what I assume is another family. Nothing out of the ordinary. When we walk in, I see it's a man with what I assume are his children in the pool. There were a lot of very young kids with him, maybe 5 or 6 kids that ranged in age, but none older than 10. He saw me and immediately stopped playing in the water with the kids so he could watch me. I quickly put my stuff down on a chair from theirs and I tell my brother he can get in the pool. I lie out to sunbathe and this man has not stopped staring. I ignored my gut feeling and thought he wouldn't do anything with all of his kids around. Next thing I know, this man is standing over me with a towel around his waist. He sits next to me and asks me something about my son. He's hard to understand as he had a thick accent and spoke quietly at first. I explained that what he assumed was my son is my brother. I quickly told him my age, hoping there was a misunderstanding and he would leave. He continued to ask me questions about where I lived and if it was close by. Very predatory questions. As I began to answer with a lie, he opened his towel to reveal wet see-through tidy whities with the chub. When I say I saw everything, I mean everything. He grins at me with a smile like a Cheshire cat and begins fondling himself. I immediately grabbed my phone and pretended like I had a phone call from my mom. I grabbed my stuff and snatched my brother out of the pool and then jumped in the car. Before I pulled off, I could see him in my rear view standing there with his hand on his junk. He had followed us to the car. I was crying when I got home and my mom came outside frantic because she could hear how distraught I was. I told her what happened and she called the police. They arrested him. Apparently, the kids he was with were his girlfriends. She came to the pool to try and defend him by saying in his country people swim in underwear. My mom let her have it, she said. Do they also fondle themselves in public in front of minors in this country? You have small children that you let this man watch alone. I was so thankful nothing worse happened, and I hope that woman thinks twice before leaving her kids alone with someone. So this happened about 8 years ago. I lived in a cheap apartment complex. I was studying at the time so I couldn't afford anything better. With 3 other apartments on my floor, I lived on the 3rd floor. Of these 3 neighbors, I partially knew one guy. He was a young named Christian dude who used to work out at the same gym as I did. But the one living next to me really creeped me out. He was an older grumpy guy who never talked to anybody. Sometimes I watched him searching our trash but never found out what he was looking for or why he did that. One day at around 11 p.m. I heard some loud noises that sounded like somebody was coughing to death at the grumpy man's place. I got up and knocked at his door asking if everything was okay. I heard someone approaching the door. The old dude yelled from behind the door something like, "What the hell do you want?" He had a strong accent so I barely understood him. I asked him if he needed help or an ambulance as I heard the coughing through the wall. The only thing I got back was, "I'm fine. Will you screw off?" I got annoyed and went back to bed. At least nobody was coughing the rest of the night. After this night, he started watching me through his window every time I went outside to have a smoke. When I got my degree, I moved back in with my parents. Like I said, it was a pretty crappy place, and the guy next to me really started to creep me the heck out, so I just wanted out of there. 3 years later, I met Christian again, who told me that the guy next to me had strangled a prostitute in his apartment, and according to him, hid the body in his closet. He got busted as he tried to dispose of it in the woods near that apartment. He originally came from South Africa, where he sat in prison for 10 years for carjacking and almost killing a person. I often refuse to talk about this because I'm still shivering when I think back to the time I lived in this crappy apartment.